So it looks like we have everybody here. Except our speaker, nine, directors with that. We'll just stop. We'll just start.
You will need to turn on your mics, otherwise they can't hear you.
Okay. We haven't started yet. So this is the special meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission 2014 Annual Retreat. Thank you all for coming. Thursday, March 13th, 2014. Secretary Elner, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Alchek,
Present.
Vice Chair Keller,
Present.
Commissioner King,
Present.
Commissioner Martinez, Chair Michael,
Present.
Commissioner Tanaka,
Present.
6 present.
5 present?
Oh, who did I miss?
We,
I apologize. Commissioner, no?
no, you got it.
Okay, 5 present, I apologize.
There you go. So before we get to oral communications, I'd just like to let the commission and the staff know that I spoke yesterday with Commissioner Martinez, who has been ill. And he had a couple of things that he wanted me to convey to us as we go into the retreat. First, and I think most important, relating to the task we have in terms of planning our priorities, is his suggestion that the challenge facing Palo Alto currently is really not one that is resolvable in terms of our differences, factions, pro-development, residentialist, what have you. He used the example of the proposed housing for seniors on Maybell and expressed the view that had there been more solidarity in the community about coming together to create a solution to a common need, it would have been easily viable to have an excellent project that would benefit the community. So he suggested that in looking at planning, we should put aside those differences and consider as a holistic community what's needed. So he asked me to pass it on. He also indicated that he's been quite ill, and because of this, he's going to be sending in a letter next week to the city tendering his resignation from the commission. So he wishes us well, and we all wish him well in his recovery. So there's that. Does anybody have anything that they want to say? That's okay. So now we have the portion of the meeting for oral communications, where members of the public who are here may speak to any item not on our agenda. And seeing that there are no members of the public here, we will move ahead. So the next item on the agenda, or the first item on our list of topics, is a report from the director, including an update on council actions and perhaps an update of the Planning and Transportation Commission, or the Planning Department's annual work plan. So Director Gittleman.
Well, thank you, and good morning. It's nice to meet outside the City Hall. It's a pleasure. First, a quick update on council actions. The council actually had no meeting this week. Next Monday, they're going to meet and take up the comprehensive plan item that they didn't get to at an earlier agenda. So we're asking them to basically affirm this process we've outlined and scheduled to get the comp plan update done by the end of 2015. And hoping that they will do so and approve a contract amendment with the consultant we've been working with, that I know the commission has also been working with. We, we expect there are going to be questions about, why is it taking so long? Why do we need to do this? But I'm hoping that the council will share staff's opinion that we're at a juncture where there's a real opportunity to do, as the chair just said, come together around a series of issues where we're not going to all be in agreement, but it's a real opportunity to have an adult conversation about how we manage growth in the community, what the future of our city is, and I think the comp plan, there's no place like a general plan or a comprehensive plan to do that kind of, have that kind of conversation. So that'll be on Monday's agenda. In addition, there are some contracts on the agenda that the department needs to move forward with some projects. Some of the contracts are what we call on-call contracts, so consultants that are on call for projects in the department. It's mostly to supplement staff. We use on-call consultants a lot for the individual review projects, single-family homes. And we also use environmental on-call contracts. For example, we have a contractor right now helping us draft a comment letter on an EIR that's circulating from Caltrain on electrification. So we're trying to get those on-call contracts in place. We also have an agenda item with a lot of contracts to implement the bike plan. So there are 17 different bike plan projects that we're hoping to take into conceptual planning and design. And so there are a number of, I think there are 4 contracts, but the contracts would actually begin the design and environmental review on 17 separate projects. So it's really exciting. It's a good big step forward if the council will concur and adopt those contracts with bike plan implementation. So that's it on next Monday's agenda. I did, in terms of the director's report, I asked the city's communications person, Claudia Keith, to come and give you an update on the our Palo Alto initiative, but I told her to come at 9 o'clock. So maybe we can continue the director's report when she arrives and go into the discussion items. And when you, I don't know when you want to talk about the schedule over here, but I'd be happy. I do have some amendments to the schedule already since it was disseminated to you. And I'd be also happy to review the department and council priorities that we also have posted here on the wall, if you'd like that, as a way to. I don't know how you want to start the discussion item.
So thank you, Hillary. Just as a housekeeping item, I was told by our staff, our technical staff, that if we have more than one microphone with the red light on, there's a possibility that we will get feedback. So we should make sure that when we're not speaking, we should turn off our mics and not create the feedback. And so while we're waiting for Claudia to get comfortable and maybe hook up her computer for the talk on.
One armed, it could take a while.
Yeah, our Palo Alto. So we had our normal pre-commission meeting this week with Vice Chair Keller and myself and the staff. We talked a little bit about what we'd like to accomplish at this year's retreat. And I think they're probably, with 5 of us all, thoughtful and spirited, there's probably 5 different expectations about what we can accomplish. But one of the things that, as the chair, I'm mindful of, that we make a report or drafted by the chair to the council at the end of the year as to what we did. And I was hoping that what we report at the end of the year in terms of what we accomplished would be lined up with the priorities that we could discuss today in terms of what we think is the most important thing for us to accomplish. And what we have as these 2 items on the wall behind us is, on the one side is the priorities that are set by the City Council for 2014, which are admirably simple, but they begin with, of all things, comprehensive planning. And then we have the department work plan for 2014, which is more detailed, but also sets forth the planning objectives for the department. And while it's entirely possible that we might sort of innovate and come up with, some ideas that would expand that somehow, my sense is that the work of the Planning Commission should fit sort of in a spot that collaborates very effectively with staff and supports the priorities of council, particularly insofar as our charter as a commission is to make recommendations to council on items that they need to consider. When we have the discussion, I think what we should do is maybe begin with some clarification of just what exactly are the council priorities and why they have expressed them in the form that they are. Any updates to the staff's work plan, and then we can see where we fit in terms of doing some instrumental things that would leverage those priorities into action that we can report at the end of the year. But it looks like our Palo Alto talk is ready to begin.
Maybe we can move the projector further up and it'll be a little smaller.
So there's a suggestion from the vice chair to move the table.
Or move the projector on the table.
Move something.
You should put just the Zoom.
Or just use the controls.
It's not a scintillating so
Yeah.
they won't lose much if you skip it, but.
So we used to have meetings of the executive committee, this very large corporation that I work for, and the question was, how many executive vice presidents does it take to change the bulb on a... And the answer is many.
Yeah.
And usually the guy who knows is the sales guy.
Exactly.
Of course.
Yay.
Awesome. So
Because he doesn't want to use them.
Let me do a proper
I'm
introduction.
going to yield the floor to Director Gittleman.
Thank you. Let me do a proper introduction here. I mentioned to the chair that it's been a pleasure to get to know and work with Claudia. Claudia is the city's Chief Communications Officer.
That's right.
We have so many officers around here. It's an interesting job title, but she really provides wonderful support within the organization. And I've always thought it's a sign of a mature organization when you have the time and the initiative to think about communications, what you're trying to say and how to say it. And Claudia supports our efforts in Palo Alto in that regard. And she's going to be instrumental, I think, with all of the city staff and commissioners in advancing this principle of our Palo Alto. And we asked her to come this morning and explain a little bit about the initiative. So.
Thanks, Hillary. Good morning. I don't know about the time part of it. I don't having the time. It's we'll see about that. So our Palo Alto is a concept that we've. It's really an umbrella about a community conversation that we're trying to have with neighbors and about really the city's future. And so we've kind of come up with a conceptual way to describe it, and this is, you probably can't read the small print, but I'll just kind of go through sort of some of the concepts behind what we're visually depicting here, which is our Palo Alto, and it's broken into really three separate tracks that intersect and are related: ideas, action, and design. So this is really just a visual depiction. The real driver, I think, of this is that we want to create opportunities for community dialogue in new ways, thinking outside the box about, how to engage and connect with the community. And our Palo Alto is really just a way to express the totality of these three tracks that run parallel, but also intersect at many key points along the way. So we'll start with the ideas piece of it, which is I would say, more of the evolving piece. But it starts with ideas that are generated from conversations, public dialogues, events, which will take many forms. But really, we want to create a lot of these opportunities and conversations beyond City Hall. And we want to involve and connect with neighborhoods in new ways, whether it's through the use of enhanced technology to reach constituents who we know don't come to City Hall or council meetings or to Planning Commission meetings, but really have important voices that we need to hear from. So some of that is happening already. It's included the relaunch. We have an online civic engagement tool called Open City Hall that we used with the core values question. And I think based on the really thoughtful input that we got, that has a lot of possibilities for really, I think, getting some deep, meaningful feedback from the community on questions that we want to ask and get their input on. We're also looking to have a more robust social media presence, an online web portals, and other technologies that many cities are using to connect with folks who are too busy or would rather connect with us via that way as opposed to coming to a city hall. So all this is ultimately geared to what we hope to bring and build citizenship. We want to create participation and citizenship so that we can create what's a dynamic culture that's really a true representation of the public's voice. I think, many of us, and you I think some of you have also expressed some frustration that there are many constituents we don't hear from. Whether they're working professionals with children who are too busy to really engage, or they engage on specific issues. Really want to build sort of opportunities to hear from those folks. There's many ethnic communities that I think are important that we don't hear from. So we're looking for any and all kinds of ideas to really branch out, broaden our community outreach, and broaden the voices that we hear from and that provide input to the decision makers in collaboration with city government. So that's sort of the end goal, if you will. And that will take, I think, a longer time to build, and hopefully is something that goes beyond specific plans and projects, but that is something that becomes a culture change in Palo Alto. So how does this all start? One of the things that we're thinking about in terms of sparking some of these ideas is having a series of speakers talk about certain topics. For example, putting together a panel to talk about who are we, looking at the demographics and economic trends affecting our community. There's a huge shift. Palo Alto won't look like it does in 10 years. What does that mean for all of the kinds of policies that you all are grappling with? For example, we were thinking about having an architectural tour, what creates place, looking at design, making it fun and interactive, getting out into the community. What's our parks master plan going to look like? Let's have a picnic in the park with family and friends and talk about it. So really trying to get out into the community to talk with folks. We're also looking at things like partnering for the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford, Institute of the Future, to come up with some different process that can eventually be institutionalized. So it's a way for city government and the leaders and the decision makers to really hear from a broad spectrum of opinions across the community. We're also building a micro website, our Palo Alto. It's in progress. So we'll hope to launch that in about a month. That will be kind of a landing page for all things Palo Alto, providing content, interactive, social media, and that folks who want to know what's going on will have a calendar of events. So a place where everyone can be linked in and connect together. So that's sort of the ideas piece of this. The action piece is more in Hillary's camp and includes really near-term actions that we can either make progress on or complete in the next year to 18 months. Many of these are things that we have heard from the community, and if we really, I think, address them, would enhance our quality of life and make some forward progress. A lot of these you're familiar with, parking issues and transportation demand management. Certainly that's been at the forefront of many things that we've heard about and that you all have grappled with too. The California Avenue Streetscape Project, which actually breaks ground on Monday. Planned community zoning reform, the updated housing element, which has just kicked off the process, the Cumberland lease, and a lot of other issues that you'll see on the the council's agenda over the next 18 months. So the action is the near-term things that are moving forward as we continue to have these ideas, events, dialogues, those kinds of things. And finally, the last piece is the design piece that is based on the foundational work that you all have done on the city's comprehensive plan. We believe it's time to engage the community with more in-depth discussions about the future of our city. And there will be a process that Hillary is bringing, is it next Monday, to the council about how that's going to come about in terms of the timeline for meetings and update of the comprehensive plan. So as you know, more than anyone, that serves as the blueprint for Palo Alto's future decision-making about land use and development issues. And our goal is to have the conversations and ideas that are continuing and generated as part of this process to help to inform the decisions and policies of the actions piece as well as the design piece of the comprehensive plan as we go forward. So as I mentioned in the beginning, they're all kind of going down the track at different paces, but do intersect and relate to one another. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. It's a very high-level overview of our Palo Alto. We are most interested in input and ideas, particularly on the beginning part of it, where we're really trying to figure out the best way to connect with the community. I know, you've been reaching out to some of your younger constituents, and so we're really looking for ideas and feedback on, how we can do that. So that's our Palo Alto. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So thank you very much, Claudia. Maybe I'll just kick things off with one question and then ask everyone else to chime in. One question I have is sort of links the ideas initiative with the design phase. And I know that the schedule for the comprehensive plan update contemplates some form of amended comp plan draft to come back to the PTC for a recommendation before it finally goes to council. And what I was interested in was whether there would be an opportunity for the Planning Commission or individual planning commissioners to be involved in the community outreach such that we're able to kind of experience concurrently what the discussion is and listen, and to the extent that we have thoughts, express those thoughts, such that when it comes back to the Planning Commission at the tail end of the process, there's not a huge element of surprise or even resistance to something that might be something that we hadn't previously had a chance to work with. So that's one question I have.
I think that's an excellent point. What we're hoping is in this process, it's a very two-way conversation. So we would encourage and hope that all of you would participate in any community dialogues that are going on about the comprehensive plan, and also so that you can hear feedback, and also for us to build in ways so that if you, for example, are not at an event or not at a conversation, that we're able to capture what the community has said and find ways to get that to you. I think that's really an important part of this. I think the community, I often hear that they give input and then they don't think that anything happens with it. And what we don't want is for people to feel like they've participated, they've given great ideas, and then they have no idea as to whether it's been passed along to the decision makers and the policy makers for any kind of informing their decisions. And so we really want to make feedback loops so that folks know that they have been heard and that their opinion counts. And so certainly we encourage participation at every level, whether it's in the ideas, community dialogue, the decision-making when Hillary's bringing an element of the comp plan process. So I think any and all of those are opportunities for participation.
I would just add one thing to that. I think this is probably the moment in the meeting where we should have handed out the little our Palo Alto pins, because I think we are going to enlist your help in this effort. Stephen Turner had this great image of this really being a campaign, and we're going to need people like you have in a campaign at the grassroots level that go out and meet with people and talk to people they know, and bring some of the ideas and issues that we want to have public dialogue about out into members of the community and friends and associates that you might have that don't come down to City Hall on a regular basis. So throughout this process, the ideas piece of our Palo Alto initiative and the comp plan update, which is the design piece of the initiative, I think we're going to find opportunities for you to be ambassadors to go out into the community and help us communicate ideas and also get feedback on those ideas. So we haven't really formed this up yet. This month is really the month or 6 weeks when we're trying to get our act together and really figure out how we're going to unroll this. But stay tuned for that, and we'll absolutely enlist your help moving forward.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So I think that there's an opportunity here to get the kind of input that we have so far not gotten from the community. And there's a couple of things about that. First of all, President Nixon had this notion of the silent majority, and we can't necessarily assume that the silent majority agrees with a particular point of view or disagrees with a particular point of view if they haven't weighed in. Although there is a tendency for those who are most unhappy to weigh in something. So one of the things that perhaps we could explore for a moment is the relationship to this participation by commissioners, for example, and being able to give input to the process in a public manner, and the Brown Act. And the extent to which we have problems with the Brown Act. And then maybe we can talk about that first, then I'll have a few other questions.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Keller, Cara Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. Claudia, I'll jump in if you don't mind on this question.
Absolutely.
Yes. So what the Brown Act is designed to do is to ensure that meetings where a quorum of planning commissioners are present take place in public. And so I think that the Palo Alto, or our Palo Alto initiative envisions is council members and planning commissioners individually going out to special interest groups, to members of the community and different areas. And this can be done in small groups so that it doesn't violate the Brown Act, but will, I think, emphasize the goals of our Palo Alto and sort of the model that we have thought about using you for as ambassadors.
So I take it by that we're not necessarily worried about the serial meeting aspect of the Brown Act in terms of communicating among commissioners through these meetings, because it will essentially be divided?
Yes, the serial meeting should of course, you should be cognizant of that, but I don't think that it's going to be an issue here, as you're going to be talking about very different types of issues when you go into the community, and community members will be raising their own concerns. And so once you all come back together, of course, you can talk about those concerns in a public format.
Okay, great. The next thing is that I'm guessing that a lot of people in Palo Alto followed the trajectory that I followed kind of the trajectory that I did, which is that when my kids were small, I mainly focused on schools, and as they got older, and as a development project was proposed in my neighborhood, I got more active and actually founded my neighborhood association. And so I think that an important way of getting parents of school-age kids is they're probably most fully focused on the schools and not as focused on the things going on in the community. So working with the PTAs, I assume that that's part of your plan, is to go with individual school PTAs and have meetings and engage them where they are.
Certainly, parents are an important group that, we want to hear from. I think that we'll have some ideas and activities that are generated to focus on attracting folks to that type of an event, whether it's scheduled for something that would make it convenient for them. So I think there's a host of different ways, and as I said, this is all still evolving. There's many groups, for example, renters. We know there's many ethnic groups that really do not engage at all in issues but they're important and important constituents in the community. So I think we're looking for any and all ideas, as this sort of evolves. So certainly that's a key group that I know we'll be looking to engage with.
Well, I guess part of what I'm getting at, and maybe I can try to think about it this way, and that is we can invite people to our events and have them meet us on our venues, or we can participate in their venues and bring up an issue and invite them to participate in whatever way is appropriate, and maybe have a short item on their agenda to bring up some key points, or have them think about it and bring it back to us. So that's the issue. Is it are they coming to our meetings, or are we coming to their meetings? And obviously, perhaps a mix is more appropriate.
Well, I certainly think we want to partner with organizations who are already engaged with the school district, whether it's we go to a school district meeting, we go to some sports event. I mean, there's a whole host of ways. That's one of I think, the beauties that we're looking for partners that we can collaborate with, Institute of the Future, a whole host of things, because we can't do this alone. It's not just a city initiative. And so if there are things that are already that community members already go to, that are part of, we want to go out to them as opposed to expecting them to always come to us. I think that's a really important point.
And I'll just close with one further thing, which is when we go to these meetings, if some of us were to go to particular meetings as outreach, or what is the mechanism for our collecting inputs if that happens at a meeting, and somehow capturing it and returning it to our Palo Alto process if there's not a staff member present?
Well, again, we're still formulating these thoughts and these ideas, how this will happen, but sometime during this process, if there's a point at which we think there's an idea or a piece of information we want to gather, input we want to gather, and we delegate, staff and commissioners and everybody to be ambassadors and to go out and collect the information, we will also be providing you the tools with which to gather that information and report it back. So we need this to be very organized, very coherent, and thoughtful. We can't just, all run out and start doing what we want to do. It's going to be like a campaign, very thoughtful and deliberate. So we'll be in touch.
Any other commissioners have questions or ideas?
Let's see. Just starting with my own experience, where we are right now, and I may not be signed up for all the things I could be signed up for, but I'm on the city council agenda distribution, I think is what it's probably called. And so I get this link, and it's very unsexy. It's just like this thing that says city council agendas, and there's a link. And if I remember correctly, there's no call to action of any sort other than, hey, it's here. I click on that thing. If I remember correctly, it even takes me into a main page, not to the actual specific agenda. And so to me, the biggest challenge is moving to the point, and part of the challenge, I believe, is that we sort of work to the Brown Act, that agendas go out 3 days before, are posted 3 days before the meeting. And then, as many of you have heard, my pet peeve is presentation materials that come at the meeting, are presented at the meeting by either applicants or staff, are not posted as part of the agenda. They show up right at that meeting time. I suspect that the bulk of people who actually watch our council meetings are at home on television or later streaming. That's a low-res feed, and so much of the material that gets presented up on the board is totally illegible, particularly where numbers are. And so I can't imagine people would want to stay engaged with that process that's delivered to them in such a low-res fashion and at the last minute, or never. With most of those presentations, again, my pet peeve is that they should always be then addended so that someone can access everything that was presented to the public at the meeting. And so I think most people around here are booked enough that they're not, if you tell them, hey, in 3 days, there's this really important thing that's happening down the street from your house, or this thing of which is of interest to you, it's very hard for people to react. Maybe they watch it, maybe they will watch it on TV, but to me, you have to move the process so that you're using sophisticated marketing techniques effectively, where you're telling people and releasing, hey, somewhere out about March or April, we're going to be working on this thing, or this project's coming before us. And so they have an opportunity to pay attention, and then when then they're prepared, they get the 3-day notice, oh, it is on the agenda, they can interact with us. The way I would see an ideal format, and I think we've spoken of this, but when I interact with certain organizations, typically commercial organizations, but maybe nonprofits, when I opt into their email list, there's often an option where there will be a list that says, I want mailings about everything. I want mailings about, in this case, it might be planning topics. I want mailings about cities' interaction with schools. And then I want interactions when a project starts coming before Planning Commission or Council, then there would be Project X. I want all mailings about Project X. I know that there was discussion with staff that at the time when there was actual public input, people could sign up for an email list at that time if they showed up to the meetings. And staff was, I don't know that it was uniform or consistent, but was then including them. I think Jaime was talking about this with some of the California Avenue projects. Then they would get, when updates happened, new reports came out, related agenda items came up, then that would be blasted out to that email list. But I think those people had to have been actively engaged. So my vision is that we would actually have this, you'd have your effectively user profile, and you'd choose, here are all the things I'm interested in that I want to be notified of. And in that way, we're pushing the information out when it's keeping people all along involved. I think typically, and human nature would probably support this just in general, but the kind of involvement we often get here is the, oh crap, I can't believe they approved that, or they're about to approve that. And so then you get all the people, and it's frustrating for us because from our point of view, we're saying, well, we never heard any of this, particularly, well, one thing pops to mind is the Rostro Road traffic calming. It ultimately became a lightning rod, but at the time, one council members mentioned that no one even came to speak to that at the meeting, and so that's sort of the way ideally you don't want to do it, is have something well down the path, and then people come out of the woodwork that are against the decision. And then also regarding the point of people's feedback, people feeling their feedback has gone ignored. Let's face it, this town, most people here were used to teachers all along telling them what a great idea it was, and being at the top of the class. And so there's some level, and it's human nature for everybody, but particularly here, people want to kind of believe, oh, I gave them an idea, and they changed the city around my idea, and it's become a wonderful city now, at the extreme. And so you can't do that. They're going to get a million ideas, and so it's hard. I don't know that the organization would have the capacity to thank everyone and to report back on every single many great suggestions that you're going to get from the citizens, ideally. But you probably can do something more general, where you ensure that you thank people for their input, that they get in the process, however it is, through this, email list, et cetera, and that the people who actually do take the effort to write a letter, make comments, show up for a meeting, that in some way you, minimizing staff time, you have some even automated thank you. We appreciate that you came out, and the decision makers are listening to you, even if it's not specific to their great suggestion. Some of the organizations that I've interacted with also do a calendar where I didn't even realize, I thought I was just signed up for one event, but now on my Outlook, I have a couple of Stanford organizations, their calendar now shows up in my Outlook, and I can choose to turn it off. So, it's not too intrusive, it didn't make me mad, but so you could have an interactive calendar where it makes it easy for people to see what's going on. Either, I'm sure there's some way to interface with Google also, but anyway, some way in which it's easy for people to have access the city's calendar. The other thing I think that would be good is, if you read the newspaper, Palo Online, and you see the comments on every planning decision, and much of, I'm interested in it and some great ideas, but a lot of it is really opinions are rooted in a lack of understanding of what we can and cannot do in the process. That the zoning exists and you can't just tell people no if they're within the existing zoning. And so I think it would be very helpful to have a fairly extensive and growing FAQs page where here's how we work. This is the box in which a planning commission or a council or a city, here's what we can influence, here's what we can't. For instance, the state housing laws, that overrides everything that we want to do in the city, that takes precedent over everything we want to do. So it helps the average person who's frustrated because some project that they don't like got approved to understand, here's what we can and can't do, here are the areas where it's gray, that we have exceptions, we can make exceptions, and so that people are a little more rooted in the process. Okay, that's it, thank you.
Commissioner Tanaka.
So I think this effort is a step in the right direction. I think our Palo Alto sounds like something that's going to help move the city forward. Just some thoughts in terms of maybe ways to enhance this and perhaps even our own communication and participation in the community, which I think this is what it's all about. And it's something which I've talked about before, and I know because of various Brown Act issues, it's not so easy. But I think I was just listening to my fellow commissioner talk about, well, email, you get this kind of cryptic link, and it's kind of goes to your spam box, and you have to go really fish for it, you have to really hunt for it in order to participate. I think one thing to think about is if it's possible to really use more modern communication technology, right? I mean, we call it social media, but it's really modern communication technology. I know people who, if I send them an email, people I know well, if I send them an email, they don't respond. But if I send them a Twitter, okay, a tweet, okay, they respond. And I know that the Brown Act is trying to catch up, or maybe not even trying, but maybe one day we'll catch up. But I think the thing, so I think what like Palo Alto Online does is it allows people to time shift and place shift with the communication. And I think right now, because everything must be like here, right, physical, like we're like 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning when a lot of people are working, right? So we can't anticipate too much community participation when we do that. But if we live stream it, I've been to many conferences where they have a universal hash and you present it on a screen. I mean, just where we allow more of this two-way communication, because right now it's very one-way, right? It's just a big blast from the city of a bunch of links and data, and there's no way to really interact, to really feel like you're being heard. And so if we want participation, I think, and I realize it's the Brown Act, but I see a lot of other people, a lot of other cities doing this, so I don't know why we can't, but I think really allowing that channel to be open. I mean, I can't even put my own Twitter handle on the commission page next to my name, because that's a Brown Act violation. It's like, what? And Twitter's probably one of the most open tools out there. Or, I think because we have this very regimented and strict reading of the Brown Act, I think it's it doesn't, and it's really ironic because, I think Palo Alto is one of the probably most tech advanced cities, but yet we're stuck in this like 1980s, like email centric, one-way, communication. We haven't hit Web 2.0. We're like Web 1.1, 1.0 or 0.9 or whatever, but it's not quite there. And I think having this active dialogue is going to enable much more participation, because I think the reality is this. I think the PTA has one good point. A lot of probably younger people are parents and they don't have time to participate during the PTA. But I think the other reality is it's not convenient, right? It's people are busy, and if they could participate remotely through better technology, I think you will see a lot better participation, and we'll get much better dialogue. We won't get so many surprises, but right now if you don't have the time to physically be there, 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning when you're working, you're just out of the picture, and I think that's part of the problem. So, thanks.
Yeah, just a couple of things, Commissioner, on the social media front. I couldn't agree more. We do have, across the city, a lot of departments have their own social media channels. The city has social media channels. I'm actually in the process, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, we'll have a social media team on board that can really help make our presence a lot more robust. We do have, if you go on our homepage, there's a Connect With Us button. If you push it, it goes to our social media landing page, which we just launched. We do have a Twitter feed from all the official City of Palo Alto accounts. For example, Mark Berman, one of our city council members, has his own Twitter account, and his feed shows up. So there are ways to get your voice out there that don't violate the Brown Act, and I'll let Kara address that a little bit more. But I do completely agree that that's a huge part of how we need to reach out to younger generation. I mean, I crack up when you say, I have a 23-year-old son. I don't even bother sending an email because he just, or actually hardly even phoning, because he just really doesn't ever read them. It's just a different way of communicating, different way of getting information. So what we do hope to do in this initiative is to come up with creative ways that folks can participate via technology, whether it's live tweets from a community meeting so that people can follow along, web streaming, a whole host of things. So I do agree that Palo Alto, the way we communicate needs to reflect the community and the city within which we live.
So, yeah, I saw Mark's Twitter feed, and in fact, I'm subscribed to it. I follow it. But I think, and I know the city already has a lot of their own, official City of Palo Alto Twitter feeds, but if you look at the way a lot of other people employ social media, it's social. It's not just some organization tweeting. It's like Mark tweeting, right? And so why, I guess that's the thing that I don't quite understand, is that it's supposed to be about conversations, and these conversations are all public. It's not like it's all like secret backroom chats going on. It's like as public as you possibly get. And so, so Mark's Twitter handle should be published on the City Council webpage. Maybe it is. I haven't checked it out. But I know mine can't be, right? And it can't even be on my card. It can't. And I think we're all, we're appointed by the City Council to help bring the voice of the community into the Palo Alto process here. And but our communication to people is really limited to one-on-one or face-to-face type of communication. And I think you're only getting a fraction of people that way. And so I think, anyways, I've talked a lot about this before, but I think this is something which we should try to promote a lot more of, and not, yeah. So anyways, enough said. Thanks.
And if I could just chime in on this issue, we certainly have heard a lot of your comments over the years, and they have been very helpful, and we do appreciate that. Obviously, we are transitioning into a new age of communication, and I think where the Brown Act comes in is when we have public officials communicating in this realm. The Brown Act simply has not caught up with current technology. That's just the way it is. However, we do not have those same limitations when staff is communicating to the public. So Claudia's team has been working on those types of initiatives, and obviously we have more work to do in that area. But in terms of the officials being able to communicate, we're getting there. I think that legislators are struggling with the same issues, but we're just not quite there yet.
So we're getting a little bit behind our schedule on the agenda. So I think our feedback to Claudia hopefully has been helpful, at least in some respects. Let's move into the next item. That's okay. We're behind. We're going to talk about the commission priorities and schedule of major projects for 2014. And Hillary has indicated that on the schedule of major projects, which is on the chart behind the staff, already this is something which has been updated. So maybe Hillary can orient us to what's new on the list, and then we can go into a discussion of priorities. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll write this up on the board after a brief introduction, but thank you. First, let me explain what we were trying to do with this schedule is show those things that we know are coming to the commission sometime this year and approximately when we think they're going to get there. And in most cases, we put the item on the commission, on the calendar only once, which is the last date that the commission has to take an action. In other words, when the city council is expecting a recommendation on some of these things. And so we thought in today's discussion, we could talk about if there are things that appear only once, but the commission feels they're going to need more than one meeting throughout the course of the year to get to that recommendation. This would be the time to surface that and to add it to our calendar. We also have to keep in mind that there are a lot of things that we just cannot predict with any certainty about when they will get to the commission or even what they are, because so much of what we do is application driven. We can't predict all the applications that will walk in the door or exactly when they'll be ready for review by the commission. So we know there are going to be some things that get added to this list along the way, and as a result, I think we don't want to overfill our dance card and have too many meetings overbooked. But the chair did have this idea that if we have, in the course of our yearly calendar, some blank spots, we could think about adding additional items in the forms of study sessions or updates. And at the bottom of the schedule that you got as a handout with your agenda, we put a list of some of the ideas that have been floating around. So that's the purpose of this calendar. And let me just describe what's changed. And then, as I said, I'll write this up on the board there. So we put this together and sent it to you at the same time that we've been working to outline for the Regional Housing Mandate Committee and now a citizens panel the schedule that we're going to use to get the housing element update done by the deadline of January 2015. In the course of doing that, we're getting a lot more, just a lot more precise about when things have to happen to meet the deadline. And so there have been a few changes around that project on this list, and I'm going to put those up on the board. In addition, we've been working to convene a citizens stakeholder group on the residential permit parking project, and that's something that's going to get to this commission for a recommendation this year. And so some of the dates, I have some more refined information about that process. And the comp plan is also something, let me see if the comp plan is one of those things. Oh, no, it's the planned community zoning reform. We got direction from the council to proceed with that project, and staff has started to think about exactly how we'll get that done and what the, schedule of steps are. And so that's evolved a little bit. So let me put up those changes just to walk you through where we are. Obviously, we're here in March, but we're thinking in April, nothing is nothing is changing. What we're saying in April is that we would be able to give you an update on the comprehensive plan. This presumes the council goes forward on Monday. We'd be able to come back to you in April with that discussion about how we'll proceed, some more definition of the process and the engagement effort that we'll be undertaking. Also in April, we're going to be asking for your review and determination on the CIP. And that's a pretty hard and fast date, because that's when the city, the Public Works and budget folks need your final recommendation. And we think this year, because you've done so much good work with the staff in the last few years about a process and organization for your discussion, we're thinking this year that we don't need a subcommittee. We can just come to the commission, and that'll be a one meeting discussion, but you should let us know if you feel otherwise. Then in May, we had the comprehensive plan scoping meeting, and we'll talk about this more in April, but we're thinking of a long scoping process. I mean, many months, as opposed to what you normally do in these things is 30 days. And during that, a whole series of meetings on various topics and meetings about alternatives and impacts, which is basically a scoping meeting. Also in May, we're going to add a discussion with the commission about the housing element sites and the revisions that we're working on, just so the commission is up to speed with the community panel and the regional housing mandate committee of the council. And no one is being left behind, and we're all kind of working on this together. We have to work in parallel on this project because the deadline is so tight. So that's the first change. Then in June, we have the downtown cap study status update. You're all aware of that project. And that's when we thought we'd come to you with the first planned community zoning reform discussion. Then what I'm going to add in June is another discussion of the housing element. Once again, so you're working in sync with the council committee and the citizen panel. Then in July, we're going to take off that, the housing element item there is going to move to August. And instead, in July, we're going to be ready to come to the commission for a discussion of the planned community zoning reform and see if we can get a recommendation from the commission on that. Then August will be housing again. September will be, there'll be a discussion of the RPP issues in advance of October, when we want to get your recommendation. Also in September, we'll be coming back to you for your final recommendation on the housing element and the related CEQA document. So I'm going to put those changes up there, and we can launch in.
So thank you very much, Hillary. So we have about 45 minutes to have just an open discussion of our priorities. The challenges associated with land use and planning in the city seem to be of greater urgency and interest than maybe in the past. And I think this is an opportunity for the Planning Commission to do some good work, to engage with the public, and to be useful to the council. So let me just open it up. Oftentimes in a retreat of this nature, somebody has an idea of what should be the answer, and you kind of work towards what what is contemplated as the ideal outcome. I think here we're coming with an open mind, although we do have the constraint of we're appointed by the council and we collaborate with staff. So let's open it up. And since we forced Commissioner Alchek to give his comments on the one Palo Alto, for our Palo Alto plan, and privately to Claudia, maybe we can start with Commissioner Alchek in terms of his provocative suggestions for priorities for the year.
I think that when I think of what should be our priorities as a planning commission, I think we should prioritize what makes our job easier. It's sort of the nature of our commission is that we are a forum to sort of delve into the issues that relate to proposals that come before us. And on a cyclical basis, we're supposed to update. We have the responsibility of, managing updates of our specific, of our plans as they relate to how we move forward. And I really feel like we're disconnected from that process, which would possibly make our jobs as we address the issues that come before us easier. So I know we've all been on committees and we've been a part of each element's update, and we've had memos about planned community zones, and I just think that sometimes the comprehensive plan hurts us more than it helps us because it's all over the map. And it's sort of designed to support and it's designed to be there to support a project and to oppose a project at the same time. And it's designed in a way that we can attach ourselves to the components of it that we like when we like a project, and we can align ourselves with the elements, the policies that oppose a project when we personally oppose a project. And I don't mean personally like it's a problem to be personally opposed to a project, but I think we should make it a priority to I don't know, to be a part of a process that articulates I don't know, a more coherent, comprehensive plan. And I know that's like so complicated, and if we're going to have a big tent comprehensive plan, then it will never be really coherent or articulate or concise. And maybe it's not meant to be, and so this is a bad priority. But I know that we are in the process. I know that the vision for the next plan update is ahead of us. I know that we've done this like interim approach to the updates, and that like the next one is supposed to start up right away. And I don't think it would be a bad thing for us to really take the lead and spend some of our commissioner time hearing from study sessions on other cities' comprehensive. I always sort of think we don't hear enough about what other cities are doing, and so maybe getting maybe the staff spends a couple weeks reviewing a different city's plan that we think is a model city, and we can take a vote on that, what city we want to hear about. Because ultimately, though, that document will help us address not just what we know is coming down the pipeline, but every project. And I feel like we're a little unpredictable. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I'd like to just put something out which might help shape the discussion. I think that Commissioner Alchek has come up with some really interesting observations and ideas that may relate more to the item that we have at 10:30 about how we do our job. You talked about what makes our job easier, how we can make the comprehensive plan more coherent. And I think you've really touched on some of the things that we should take up maybe at that point. In terms of priorities, I know that the comprehensive plan has a structure of, at least in each element of the 1998 plan, there was a vision for the element, and then there was policies and programs and so forth that supported that vision. I think when we talk about commission priorities and projects for 2014, I'm thinking of things that we're actually going to complete. So if there's a vision, for example, that is to go west, that's maybe a nice vision, but maybe in terms of what we're going to discuss in terms of priorities is we're going to go west for 37 and a half miles and arrived by 4:30 PM after, traveling by dog sled or something. So we just know exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so the priority then is something which is pretty clear, and if there's some set of work that has to happen to get it done, we can actually engage in that work. And I think that the hopes that that Michael expressed regarding, enhancing the comprehensive plan, I think that we have, a significant set of deliverables over the next 2 years, perhaps, in terms of helping the council update the plan, and that we've got specific tasks that we have to do. But I think that I think we're mindful that here we are in 2014, and that the 1998 plan, was terrific, when adopted, and now we have a chance to adopt a plan in 2015 that's terrific now, and will serve us into the following decade. So with that, let me turn to maybe Commissioner King has been making notes here. You want to share some priority ideas or questions or?
Thank you. Well, I'm, of course, I believe, still the newbie here, right? So I've only been around for about a year. And I'm, from my vision, I'm comfortable in our more reactive role, which is council and staff giving us assignments to work on. I think in what I've seen over the last year, where we were more proactive and said, hey, we want to drive the priorities, was in what I thought was instructive and effective colleagues memo around the planned community zoning, which I think occurred right about when I came on the commission, and which ultimately was part of the inertia which has put us where we are now, with a timeout on planned community zoning and a plan to relook at how we do that process. So I'm comfortable with the rest of the commission, delineating things that they personally or as a group want to make priorities. But for me, I see we've got a pretty full plate of things, and I guess relative to that, as far as Director Gittleman's request of, our timing, thus far I've seen the process of, which is often iterative, as being some exercise in herding cats, right? You never know what the commissioners as a body are going to decide on. Many things I've thought, we're just going to give some feedback and move this thing along, and ultimately we voted as a commission to not move it along, that we wanted it to come back. And so I'm not sure, I'm not troubled by it, but the goal of saying, can you agree that we're going to move this thing along on your schedule there by this date, and that all the work to get to that, moving it along, happens in advance. I don't see that matches real well with my personal observations of how the meetings and process has worked. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Commissioner Alchek.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's you've been here a year, and I've been here just a little bit more than that. And it's funny because I feel like the two things that we prioritized, and maybe one of them I prioritized, but the planned community zoning, which we sort of said we're going to create a colleagues memo, and we were going to have a study session on it. We put it out there as a priority, and then City Council's like, okay, yeah, no, it is a priority, and we're going to take care of it. And I feel like I was hitting this drumbeat about residential parking permit for the year and a half I've been on this committee, and it's like the message has been received, and City Council is going to take the lead on it. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because they get elected, and we're really here. We're not necessarily supposed to be a part of the political process. We're supposed to be fearless. But it is sort of interesting that sometimes we don't really get to choose our priorities. We can say what we think is a priority, and if someone agrees, they'll just take it away from us. Because sometimes I wonder if we're supposed to drive the process or if we're supposed to be reactive. I sort of agree. Which is why I mentioned the comprehensive plan, because that's the one thing I feel like we have ownership over. But you know, I feel like we can talk about, and maybe this is something that Alex Spinelli would have mentioned if he was here, but, you know, the specific plan for CalApp, really developing a specific plan or a specific downtown plan and facilitating that discussion. I have a feeling, though, if we really started that discussion, it would just get taken away from us, but maybe I'm wrong.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, I've been on commission a little bit longer, but I think my fellow commissioners make good points. I think CalApp still remains a good one. There's still a lot of work to be done there. I think there's still quite a bit of opportunity. I think there's going to be things that we're going to have to do because there's applications. We're reacting to externalities. But I think in terms of priorities, maybe something that we could think about, because those things will also happen and those things will show up on our schedules. There's nothing that we have to do to be proactive, or it will just happen because it has to. But maybe the thing to think about are things that we want to keep kind of in front of mind. So long-term objectives that wouldn't necessarily pop up on our agenda because it's being driven by an applicant or by city council. And I think CalApp is something which still, there's still work that can be done there. That's not necessarily proactive, because it's not one gigantic landowner that's driving the process here. It's kind of, if we don't drive it, I'm not sure who would necessarily. So I think that's one. I think the other one to me would be, and just kind of following on our last discussion, I think, you know, with the halting of PCs in the city, I think that's kind of a reflection of perhaps lack of community input or connection. I'm not sure how to say it, but I think, and maybe this is bigger than the Planning Commission. It actually probably is, but being able to get more community input into the process somehow, I think would be good, so that there aren't surprises. The community's more bought into decisions that are made. So those are two that I could think of, and I think in terms of priorities, because I've been at a few of these retreats before. I think fewer priorities is good. So like, we should probably walk out of here with no more than 3 or something like that. Something really short, something that we could remember. And I think these priorities don't necessarily need to be ones which are going to show up on our agenda, because that automatically happen. I think these priorities should be kind of like guiding principles or guiding things that we want to achieve in the long term, but won't achieve without us proactively pushing on it. Thanks.
So I'm going to call on Commissioner Tanaka later in the meeting when we wrap up to state your 3 priorities and 3 guiding principles. So feel free to make notes. I'm going to put you on the spot. Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So I don't want to add anything particular to our stuff to do for the list. I think our plate is pretty full. And I don't want to add anything to the council's priorities, but I want to riff on them a little bit. So the first thing is, I'm going to start with the bottom, technology and connected city. And 2 of my fellow commissioners mentioned that we could do a better job in terms of communicating, in particular in terms of social media and things like that. And my understanding of the Brown Act is as mentioned by our council, is that the Brown Act does not limit input from the public to in any way. And we're not using social media to bring input in. And it does not limit output by staff. Essentially what it does is it focuses output by commissioners, board members, and the council and other Brown Act affected bodies in producing output outside of meetings. So if you think about it that way, to the extent that we have output that is narrowcast rather than broadcast, that is focused, that has specific information by staff, that solicit input from the public, and that we could have meetings in which, for example, there's nothing to prevent hashtags from being assigned, and whatever people tweet appear on the board at one of our meetings, because there's no rule against that, and as far as I understand, in terms of the Brown Act. I think that the Brown Act doesn't necessarily have to be updated with technology. We just have to understand how to apply it to the new technological system. From the point of view of the policies of the Brown Act, they're equally applicable under the new scenarios. So I think that the issue is just catching up in terms of applicability, not in terms of the policies. The next thing is in terms of the comp plan. So there are a couple of things about that. So the first thing is that there was a colleague's memo that never saw the light of day by three commissioners talking about a particular idea on the housing element. And we were told, well, we shouldn't have a study session on that because it's going to come up in the housing element revision plan that will happen in 2014. Well, I'm not sure if it will come up, and I don't see if there's an opportunity to do that. I guess I can talk about it now briefly, but it was basically about the idea of dealing with the rate of housing growth and having some mechanism for managing the rate of housing growth so that it would be more even, at least market rate housing growth. That's what it was about. So. I'm not sure how that will fit into the process. And we were promised that we would have an opportunity to provide input into it. And if it doesn't happen soon, it ain't going to happen. And I think that will be unfair. And in particular, there's an issue, a more broad point, is that there's an issue about things coming to the commission for our consent as opposed to advice. And when they come to us late in the process, after there's been a deliberative process outside, and we basically, we have deadlines on going to the council, and therefore there's limited changes that we can do on them. So to me, there are two fixes to that problem. One fix is to have early study sessions on these current items. So basically, we should start filling up the months of the next couple of months with early study sessions, a couple of months in advance of an item coming to us for a decision, in which we can discuss things. And that we have straw votes on these early study sessions so that we can see the sense of the commission on these items to get direction from staff. Otherwise, there's the common problem that we've had about a bunch of different opinions and no consensus. And actually, when we were doing the revision to the comp plan and we had some sort of straw votes, it did help us indicate that there was a sense of commission on some things and on others. And some people won, some people lost, but at least where there was consensus, it was made evidently clear to staff, and I think that it's helpful. Two final things. One is that with respect to Commissioner Olczyk's comment about the comp plan says whatever you want it to say in the sense that you could find things for and against it. I think that's partly a stylistic thing about the comp plan that I would suggest. I've mentioned this private. I'm not sure if I mentioned this publicly. The comp plan has wording in it which is encourage development encourage development that does X. Encourage development near transit, okay? Or encourage development that is harmonious with whatever, as opposed to encourage development to do something, which means that you want development to have certain characteristics, but you're not encouraging all development that just has those characteristics. There are other things it has to meet. So by that stylistic change of encourage development to do something, as opposed to encourage development that does something, you actually wind up with less conflict, because those things are not in and of themselves justifications for that development. They are things that development should do, but they're not reasons that development should happen. Okay? And finally, there's an issue which I think has to do with the extent to which planning is bottom-up versus top-down. Bottom-up planning is essentially planning limited by zoning. And when a developer comes along and says, I have this parcel, this is the zoning on it, and I'll develop it to its maximum potential, which is typically what developers do. And I don't blame them, because that's a way to maximize your profits on it. Then that's essentially what happens in the absence of top-down zoning. Now, there are several ways of doing top-down zoning. One way that's been mentioned by several people is specific plans, okay? And specific plans essentially say, this is what we want where, and we're going to define it more precisely. And we had a big process of specific plans with SOFA 1 and SOFA 2, and they were so involved and so time-consuming that we now have these concept area plans that I'm not sure that they have anywhere near the power of those specific plans. However, those specific plans in part came about because of major land use changes with the Palo Medical Foundation moving out. And we don't have a similar change. Maybe we should do a specific plan about the Fry site if that changes, because that's a big enough site that should, and that area, should have a specific plan to it as opposed to mainly just a concept area plan. And we really didn't look at that often enough. And I think that that's an area, not necessarily downtown Palo Alto, downtown Palo Alto, it's kind of hard to come to a specific plan. California Avenue, it's hard to come up with a specific plan in general because there's so many different landowners. But certainly, Fry site, a specific plan for that, certainly an excellent idea. And because there's essentially one big land mass that we should plan better. But another idea is that dealing with the rate of growth is a way of dealing with the top-down issue in a clearer way. Managing the rate of growth as opposed to just having bottom-up allows us to have some sort of process that is more top-down in some way, and it's somewhere in between. So I think we should think a little more about this top-down versus bottom-up. And we're certainly not going to eliminate bottom-up, but to the extent that we can think about top-down from specific plans, from rate of growth, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond to a couple of those thoughts. First, on the topic of growth management, we see this as one of the primary discussion points in the comprehensive plan process that we're embarking on, hopefully starting Monday. That one of the very first things that we'll engage with the community on and with the commission on during the scoping process will be this idea that in Palo Alto we've had this cap, the citywide cap and a downtown cap has been our growth management tool essentially. But other communities have used different tools, and so we're going to be exploring what other communities have done in that regard and having a discussion about the options that are available and alternatives we might consider in the comprehensive plan. So I know you were probably looking forward to doing that in the context of the housing element, but it's not going to be in the housing element process. It's going to be in the comprehensive plan process, but it will be occurring very shortly. I mean, within the next few months, we'll be engaging in that very discussion. In terms of, I wanted to make two other points. One is about this list, and this is exactly kind of the discussion we want to have. I put a star next to the 1, 2, 3, 4 things on that list, where those are the points at which we are hoping the commission will make a recommendation to the council on specific matters that they have delegated to you. And so we need to know from you if you need more meetings, more involvement, study sessions, or the like in advance of those, so that you don't feel like you're getting jammed at the end. We don't want to do that. I mean, we don't want to come to you and feel like you're just being asked for consent, because we really want a recommendation. We want it to be thoughtful. And so on all of these things, with the exception of the CIP, and I explained that I think you've done enough good work on that in the past, all of these things, we've got a number of meetings outlined in the calendar in advance of the decision points, the stars, and we need to know from you whether that lines up the way it should. Last point, the idea of specific plans. I will be perfectly straight with you. We have resource constraints here in Palo Alto, like everywhere. We cannot just not do everything all at once. We are doing a housing element, we are doing a comprehensive plan, we're doing PC zoning reform, we're doing residential permit parking, we're looking at parking structures, we're looking at TDM. We cannot at the same time take on a specific plan. So apologize, we're just not going to be able to add that to our workload this year. But it is an idea that we could, keep on the back burner if at the end of the comp plan process, we think that our area plan for California Avenue hasn't been effective enough, we could think about whether we wanted to do something more specific after that. But I just, before that idea gets legs, I want to be perfectly just straight with you. We just don't have the resources to take on another major initiative like that.
So thank you. We've got on our agenda about another 12 minutes or so on priorities. And I want to give sort of everybody one last chance to weigh in. But to kick things off, I know Commissioner Tanaka suggested that we're better off with a shorter list of more significant priorities. And he suggested that we have 3. So I have, the spirit of, if you go to an improv performance, the audience shouts out suggestions and the performers go, got it. So I got a few ideas, and it's more than 3, but, we can sort of, toss out the stuff that doesn't work. Here would be my, sort of brainstorming potential candidates for a short list of priorities. It's parking, traffic, land use, master planning, study sessions, and joint meetings. Parking, in the spirit of Silicon Valley with 3-letter acronyms, we have TDM, RPP, and TMA. In traffic, there is a number of possibilities, but I think bike plan, transit, and rail corridor. Land use, which the deeper thinkers here are thinking of managing growth and change. We have the housing element and work on the comp plan, the our Palo Alto events, downtown development cap, PC zoning reform. Master planning, there are some examples that oftentimes you have this question of whether the council or the planning commission is more ad hoc versus relating to, larger principles that guide the land use. Some ideas are the El Camino Grand Boulevard, zoning map update. We've heard about specific plans and resource constraints. Study sessions, I think that they're extremely useful, and we should be tactical in how we sort of schedule and choose what we study. But study sessions, I think we should sprinkle throughout the year on a calendar. Not necessarily every meeting, or even every month, maybe at least every quarter. So we should, focus on what are the areas where we could make the most value by study. And study sessions would include an opportunity to explore best practices of other communities. Would be a chance for us to air colleagues' memos if we want to do work, to bring in outside experts as speakers from time to time, and really to invite the public to weigh in on topics of such interest. And then we have, traditionally, we meet jointly with the council on ARB during the year. So that would be my list. That's too long, but let's go back and let me just start with Vice Chair Keller.
So quickly, I don't think we can do a precise plan on Fry's, but I think that site turns over in 2019. And that's, I think, the timing of that. So after the comp plan is through us, that in 2015, I think that should be put a pointer tickle on the agenda for 2016 to work on that, and I think that's what we need to do. And I agree with the chair's suggestion. I think that we need a study session on each of the 3 items up that are starred, other than the CIP. I think that we should have probably study sessions more like monthly rather than quarterly, because I think there's enough items on the agenda. And when we talk about colleagues' memos and things like that, we'll figure out. I think that there'll be more of those bubbling up if we had a process for dealing with them.
So Commissioner Tanaka, you were very wise in suggesting that we limit ourselves to priorities that were the most important. How do you feel about that now?
I think that a small number is good because you can remember them. And I was thinking also about priorities. I think priorities should be something which kind of help you make trade-offs, or help force to make trade-offs, because If it's too broad, then you might as well almost not have them, because it's like, we're going to breathe today. It's like, okay, great, okay, that's helpful. And so I think in order for these priorities to be useful, they should do some sort of trade-offs. I'm not sure I have much more insight in terms of the priorities than I did when I first started, but I was looking at the city council priorities, and I thought, okay, a lot of those could be planning commission priorities, and maybe what we should do is start with those. And I think the first two are clearly, well, maybe not the first two, but the first one certainly, the second one kind of, and third one maybe. And maybe what we should do is center the priorities around those and push into one level to what would be a planning commission level priority.
Commissioner Alchek?
I may be only speaking for myself here, but I think it would be helpful if staff made the case to the city council that they should make us a priority. Because frankly, you had talked about this idea that we sometimes feel like we get pushed into something too quickly. We get rushed to make a decision, and I've been a part of meetings where we say we need more time, we need more input, we should have 2 more meetings, more public. I don't think the public comes to our meetings because if they're going to make a case, they make it to city council. So that's not me being cynical. They don't come to our meetings. Last time we had a meeting, we had a bike plan discussion, and one resident who admitted he had not been on a bike for over half a century spoke, and another resident who represented the bike coalition or whatever spoke. And it struck me afterwards that I should have asked that resident who was representative of the bike group how many people he spoke for, because that should mean something. But it's sort of funny that nobody shows up to speak at our meetings. And you know what? If I was hard pressed for time and I knew that the people who are really voting on the matter are going to meet next Monday, I would just wait till next Monday. And I think that the city council is a little ambitious in their plan to sort of deal with parking and PC zoning and well, all their, all the ways they've sort of jumped into the process. And I know that they're eager for us to have a study session on it, but it ends up just being a study session for them, and they end up getting more, spending more time on the issue than I think they really want to. And I think the result is sort of frustrated by that. And I really wonder if there's a way, I think you're right, they have their own set of priorities, which a lot of them could be ours, and how can we really help them? I don't know. I've thought about this a lot, but I think our process is hampered when nobody shows up, and I'd like us to sort of acknowledge that. And instead of buying more time, maybe the trick is to not buy more time. Say, you know what? Nobody showed up. This is what we think. Move it on. Because no one shows up to the next meeting either. And I don't know. Maybe if you can't show up and you can't send an email, you shouldn't be allowed to speak at the council meeting. Because once they provide us input, it informs our process. And so I'm really excited about the notion of having a PC zoning reform recommendation to council, except that I have absolutely no idea how we're going to reform that process unless we had a really engaged discussion about what is a public benefit. And it can't be, I really don't want to come to a meeting and nobody shows up and we say, well, why don't we take another 3, and then at the end of the day, no one's coming. So I really like the priorities that you've laid out. And my only comment is I hope that they are in fact prioritized. Not just by us, because it doesn't matter if we prioritize them. If no one else thinks our meeting is the priority, then our process is hampered.
So Commissioner King, would you like to have the next to last word?
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and keep it short, endeavor to keep it short. First, I'd like to say thank you, Arthur. Part of my comment about the herding cats and managing this is a little bit of, I don't have in my mind an image of the process, I think. And I'm I believe strongly that if you can't either draw it or write it, it's confusing for people, and it's likely to not be as successful as all parties would like. And so it might be helpful if because I think there are some things that are, for instance, in the extreme. Some things are strictly advisory, and those are, okay, it's going to come to you, you're going to, see it, and it's going to move along. Other things, there is a process, I believe, and Arthur helped out with that regarding discussing study sessions. And I think, I guess, by way of what I would consider a priority is clarity between commission and staff of the process, specific to the start items and in general. And so I don't know how we get there. Can we do a flow chart that says, oh, here's how this process should work, and we're hopeful, or we want to support you, commission, in giving you the tools and information that you need to help us meet our goal, which is to have this thing move on at such and such a point. So to the extent that that's possible, that would be helpful for me, certainly. And I think also when we look at, we've got 2 commissioners, we're going to have 2 new commissioners, and I'm not sure who else has a term coming up this year? My term, because I entered it a half term.
My term comes at the end of the year.
At the end of the year. So potentially in the extreme, we would have 4 new commissioners within the next year. And so the more that we can make the process clear, the more helpful. So from my standpoint, that's a priority that we have control over, we can influence. With respect to and with all respect to the process, sometimes these things are, I always remember back in my corporate Dilbert days of having these big retreats, and we'd argue for hours over objectives, strategies, and tactics, and wait, no, that's not a tactic, that's a strategy. and it wasn't a very fruitful process. That wasn't very fruitful. So I'm not sure how much, I guess for me to say something should be a priority, and I think it's something we have to have some influence over and some control over it, as opposed to making, if things are coming to us, that's not really a priority, that's our job description kind of thing. So for me, that clarity of process would be a priority. And then the other thing is, again, us being advocates for improving the communication process and engagement process with the public. And in fact, and relative to that point, Commissioner Alchek mentioned about, nobody shows up for when we delay things. I can't remember the topic, but there actually was one where I was adamant to vote to move along the agenda item. Other commissioners and the majority said, no, let's hold off and have one more public meeting. Hardly anybody showed up this time. And there actually ended up being maybe even in 2 digits of people showing up. And so I was surprised. And so that, to me, that says, oh, we didn't do a good job of getting people there for that first meeting, which would have been the optimal time for input. Thank you.
So we're doing a great job, I think, of being on time. Let me just try to wrap up. So the clear sense of the commission was not to generate a list of priorities. So this sheet here that we've put here on the wall so that we could capture the list of priorities, we're not really jumping up to write ideas there. But I think we've had a pretty wide-ranging discussion, and I think it's been oriented sensibly towards the department work plan. And there are a number of things that might be slight changes from our past practice that would be a potential continuing improvement in our productivity as a commission. So I'm just going to make the offer that on behalf of the commission chair and vice chair, perhaps what we could do is commit to work closely with the staff, with Hillary and Aaron in particular, as we formulate the proposed agenda for future meetings. Sometimes this comes to us as a final decision that's made at the staff level. But if you'd like to float that out to us prior to finalizing it, what we can do is give you feedback, thinking about today's discussion about priorities, and make sure that anything that's on a critical path that may need some milestones or other work such that our final action is fruitful. I think that would be the value that I would hope to provide. The observation's been made that we have 2 vacancies currently on the council, with Commissioner Martinez's decision to resign, and Commissioner Pinelli already having left. And we don't have a groundswell of candidates, I'm told. And I understand this is not unique to the Planning Commission in Palo Alto, that many boards and commissions don't see a lot of interest in people offering to serve. And my observation about that is that Palo Alto is full of movers and shakers, a lot of people who have a lot of experience and talent to bring to the table, but they're busy, and when they take time to do something, they like it to have an impact. And I think even though the Planning Commission is often thought of as a very hardworking and important commission, I think sometimes we're frustrated, or I'm frustrated, that we're not having as much impact or as much involvement on some of the planning topics as one might think would be relevant to the charter of the commission. And I think that just as a hope that I would express to council is that the efficiency and effectiveness of council is constrained if they don't, as a council, make better use of the preliminary steps in all these processes. So if something comes to the council that's not ready for prime time, then their own process is going to extend well into the night, and it's going to extend into subsequent meetings, and maybe will engender public distrust and not a lot of confidence in the decision. So I think that council can do themselves a favor by placing more reliance on boards and commissions, and this is not just the Planning Commission, and I won't go into any details, but I think that the city would be, I think, served favorably if there was less cynicism on the part of the public about the point of coming to a commission meeting and expressing their ideas or questions, and on the part of commissions making their own actions and recommendations to council. So let's take a break, come back in 10 minutes, and then we'll be on to the next discussion item, which is how we do our job. So we're all back. Our next item is a discussion item on basically the effectiveness of the Planning Commission, how we conduct our meetings, the way we use subcommittees, and the appointment of liaisons and representatives to work with other bodies. And I know that many of us have ideas on how we can do our work even better than we're currently doing, if that's possible. And I just want to kick this off that I think that we have a very conscientious Palo Alto Legal Department, and we're highly compliant with the Brown Act. And I think we need to be, I guess, expansive in terms of how we operate within that zone of compliance to get more work done, focus more effectively on our priorities, and particularly things that are not just sort of for consent with a very brief, airing, but where we need to do some analysis of data, some iteration of ideas, some feedback, or even some drafting. We need to figure out how to capture the value of those activities. And to me, an organizing principle of any meeting of a commission or a management team or even a corporate board of directors relies to some extent on what the agenda of the meeting is. And the power to set the agenda, as well as, other than recording verbatim minutes, capturing the action in terms of what the minutes say, is a lot of leverage in terms of what actually gets done or what gets acknowledged. And I think that there's a number of categories of work and discussion that are candidates for any regular or special meeting that we might have as a commission. We have oral communication, which frequently there's nobody from the public or very few from the public or a small group of people who attend very regularly and talk about anything and everything. We have the director's report, their staff report. And then I think we have some categories that may not always have pending matters. There might be a docket which would be reactive of current planning. And we should make sure that we address any current planning so that there's no backlog there. Likewise, I think there would always be a docket of issues relative to long-term planning. I think the review or an update on the status of major projects. I think the work plan for the department is very useful. And if we, in terms of Brown Act compliance, if we make sure to publicize the list of major projects, then we could have, we can open up a compliant discussion of the status of any of the items which are major projects on that list, if there's any movement to be noted. Then we have items that I'm just going to call staff reports. And usually the main business of the commission, that as we've been transacting it since I've been on, has been in the form of receiving a report from the staff. It reflects a lot of work, a lot of excellent work and recommendation, and typically, one way or another, sooner or later, we validate the recommendation of staff and send it up as a recommendation of the commission to council. So, whereas right now, the staff report items are the majority of what we do as our work, I would say that they are an important part, but it shouldn't dominate, maybe to the extent that we allocate time. We've had a lot of suggestions today and at earlier meetings about our interest in noting planning and transportation best practices, and we seldom actually have that discussion. So I think using the agenda to allow us to discuss best practices openly and publicly, and to encourage the public, if they have questions or ideas about best practices, would be a valuable part of our meeting structure and process. We've talked about our interest in, as a commission, doing work that takes the form of study sessions. Maybe something that would support a study session would be work that not just done by the staff, but done by ourselves in terms of colleagues' memos, or relying on the input from experts about best practices that we would like to study, and encourage discussion with the community. Then we have matters that for which it may be appropriate for us to form a subcommittee reports. And I think that in our bi-monthly meetings, there's a number of ways we might structure the agenda such that we can actually move ahead pretty efficiently and effectively, and encourage a high quality of information and analysis on topics that are relevant to our charter, to make recommendations to council, and to be a forum for the community in terms of planning and transportation concerns. So that's my kickoff. Let me open it up. Who's ready to go?
This is about how we can improve, and I'd be happy to start.
Commissioner Alchek.
Okay, so I'm really hoping that in light of the title of this topic, we can be all very insensitive and be, and let's not take anything too personally, because I really think there are things we can do to improve here, and I don't want anybody to feel like I'm being critical if I say something and you may have done it, because I'm not actually thinking of any individual person when I make some of these suggestions, okay? So I'm just throwing that out there. So I think one of the things that I would like to see, and this is just, I'm going to put it out there right away because I think that's how it should be, is I wish we would start off, I wish we would kick off our discussions, our comments, not our questions, but our comments. And I think it's important we create more distinction there between when we ask questions and when we comment on topics. But I would like to see us kick off our comments with statements like, I support the staff suggested motion, but I have concerns about X, Y, and Z. Or I oppose the staff suggested motion, and here are the reasons X, Y, and Z. One of the reasons I think this would help is because maybe I will spend 2 of my or 3 of my 5 minutes, or however much time we're using, talking about issues that are not concern of yours. And if, for example, we've gone down the line and there seems to be a lot of support for a motion, but there are some concerns, we can spend the bulk of our discussion talking about the issues that we seem to not agree on. So, in the last couple meetings, we've sort of resorted to this straw poll system, and I think there are some merits to it. But what ends up happening in the straw poll system is we have our meeting, which lasts for however long they typically do, and then towards the conclusion, we get involved in a straw poll process, which requires a very verbose and articulated approach to finding consensus. And then maybe the way you said something is not exactly the way I would have said it, and we end up not creating an opportunity for debate on those issues. We're just discussing how to phrase them for a really long time. And so if, for example, we kicked off the meeting like, I support the suggested motion for the, Bike Boulevard. My concern is the berm. That's really I'm going to support this, but I'd like to discuss the berm, and here's my concern. And then instead of me spending any time talking about why we should definitely pass this, I would just say, it's an interesting point. I don't really know what a berm is, or if I do know what a berm, I want us to get past the point which I believe is, for example, if you go to a city council meeting, they fail at this. They talk forever. And a lot of them say the same thing, and I think they're doing it because they're elected and they need to sort of create a platform that defines them. We're not. And so I think we could be a lot more effective if we focus on the things that we potentially disagree on as opposed to the things we all agree on. I don't think the community is better for hearing 5 of us say how important bikes are. I think we should just sort of move past that process. So I'm just suggesting, and it's not because we don't have efficiently fast meetings. Under our current chair, our meetings are exceptionally quick. And I think that's a good thing. But I don't want to get to the straw poll process at the very end and have this back and forth, and we have to agree on the specific words. I'd rather we hashed out more before we get to there, and then maybe we wouldn't need the straw poll process. I particularly don't think we need the straw poll process when we're not having a motion that puts up a project or down. I think when we give direction to staff, they would be better served if we really came out early on with the things that we are concerned about, and then maybe we don't need a straw poll because it's obvious that 4 or 5 of us have concerns about X. I'm not saying no straw polls. I'm just saying I think it's not a great tool as it is right now. Maybe we can improve it by being a little bit more direct about how we feel about certain things. And I wanted to say one other thing. When I first started, this comes as no surprise, I had disagreed with something Commissioner Keller said in one of our meetings. And I said, I disagree with Commissioner Keller. I think, and I repeated what you said, and I said, I don't think this is right. And then Chair Martinez said, sort of critiqued me after. He says, look, don't mention Commissioner Keller and what you disagree, just say what you believe in. And looking back on that, I think that that's actually bad advice, because it's, I don't think you took it personally, and we're adults, and we don't all need, I don't need to say, oh, those are great ideas every time you say something just to make you feel better. I think it's much more instructive to staff and to the community when I say, actually, the specific idea you came up with, I don't favor, and here's why. And then there's more of an idea of where we're at. If I ignore the suggestion and I just talk about the things I find important, then we do have to have a straw poll, because I haven't addressed what it is you brought up. And that's one of the things, we only have 5 minutes to speak, and so sometimes we just want to say what's important to us, and we fail to sort of mention, by the way, Mike, I totally disagree with you on X. But we don't do that because we only have so much time. And it might help if I knew that no one agrees with X. Or if I knew, by the way, and sometimes we do it. Sometimes we'll say stuff like, I agree with the statements my commissioners have made, and here's some further points. But I think specifics would help. And I guess, my ongoing point, which is how do we get more people in the room? And I know we were talking about this in the communication thing, and you had this idea of, you mentioned that you've been to conferences where they put up a big screen. I've been to dance clubs where there's a big screen. I've been to concerts where there's a big screen, and it'll be like at the Fillmore, right? Will be the handle, and it'll be like, I'll try to make this relevant. Imagine, Paul McCartney's on stage, and you really want to hear this, one song, and you keep texting to the Twitter feed, play the damn song already, and everybody can see it, and it's, just imagine imagine if we created an incentive for people to watch at home. And I don't know, is it really live? Is it like to the second live, or is it a delay by?
It's, because at times on council meetings, I'll listen on the radio, I'll have the radio going and then the TV going if I'm walking between rooms, and if there's an offset of, it's probably 10 or 15 seconds.
Okay.
I don't know.
Imagine if somebody in the audience or one of us was speaking, and again, this is not output, so maybe this is not Brown Act problematic, but imagine that at Palo Alto PTC Twitter handle's feed is just there, and someone responds really positively to something you're saying, as you're saying it. Like, yay, Commissioner Keller, that's exactly what we're trying to say. And then somebody's like, why do we care about somebody who hasn't ridden a bike for 50 years? People can, imagine we create an incentive for the public to actually turn the radio on and turn the TV on. If I knew that I could just tweet my thought on whoever's talking right now, I would do it. So, and then finally, just because you just reminded me of it, I think we should allow a little more interruption. I'm
going to interrupt. Who's next? Commissioner Tanaka, our resident Caltech graduate.
Okay, so just to follow the practice that Commissioner Alchuk was saying, I support what he's saying, actually. I think our time's very precious, and we should focus on where we disagree versus where we agree, because otherwise it's a bit redundant. So I think that's a good idea. One other quick suggestion I have is, when I first started the commission, we all had these little light switches, like the little voting thing, and you could press a button to interrupt, and then we've kind of gone away from that. And I like to propose as a way to speed up the process, we could also all maybe start adopting that again, and be able to use the lights. And I personally thought that was, I'm not sure if anyone, well, I think just Commissioner, the Vice Chair, and myself have, I'm not sure if you ever used the lights, but.
So I'm happy to use the lights. I need to be trained on how to recognize who's pushing the button, because what it says is the names of the council members, and it doesn't say who the planning commissioners are. So if I might call on Gail Price or Mark Berman and they're not there, then anyway. So if Commissioners Tanaka and Keller will train me, I will keep you in line.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner King.
Let's see.
Please turn on your mic.
Thank you. So just in addressing Commissioner Alchek's comments about the announcing initially support or not. So I don't have I'm not anti that, but one of the things, and I don't think there's a perfect mechanism for this. I think what you're saying is that, for instance, if we went down the row, for every person says, oh, I support, I don't support, and in your, I acknowledge and agree with the fact that us focusing on then the things we want to either amend or change, feedback, is great. But the thing that, if we're trying to focus on that, the challenge is, for instance, on the bike boulevard, on that one, I had thought, and with all respect to those majority who voted against it the first time, I had thought, oh, this is a slam dunk, there's been all this input, so in that case, I would have said I support, and would not have elaborated, and in fact, in that case, it's true, I didn't say, and here's why I think we should move ahead. I strongly believe we should move ahead. In a case like that, then if you don't realize you're the only person supporting, you're not making any compelling arguments in support of the motion. I think that's what you might miss if we're saying, we just say support and then what we change about it. So again, I'm not seeing anything perfect coming out, yeah. I do, and I'm curious if we have any feedback as far as, are we breaking any protocol? I do like, and I don't think we're actually doing a straw poll, we're using an unfriendly motion method is how we're doing it. I think the one thing that, I don't think we've done this, is that when we do that, I think we should then we really have to each be given an opportunity to address the unfriendly motion so that we're effectively arguing for or against inclusion of that unfriendly motion into the original motion, would be my feedback. And then I guess the other thing is, one of the contestants battling it out with Arthur for most questions asked, I sometimes have a little bit of frustration that we're limited to some fixed amount of minutes on the question part. I completely agree on the opinion part that there should be a fixed limit. On the question part, I sometimes, and it often depends on the, how comprehensive the staff's report is. Sometimes I may not have many questions, other times I have a lot of questions, and so to be limited on that, sometimes frustrates me. Although you could also argue, well, if you have that many questions, I should read, or one should read the report in advance and ask those questions via email prior to the meeting. So I'm curious to hear people's feedback on that. And, and then also regarding the inclusion of new media, such as tweets at a meeting, as the potential Paul McCartney fan in the crowd here, generation, I would probably find that potentially I'm willing to try anything. It'd be interesting to try that. But half of the, a significant portion of tweets reflect the amount of time spent thinking of the tweet, which is instantaneous. And so you would probably also get a lot of negative, particularly given the venue, a lot of negative comments like, oh, you're in the pocket of developers, and oh, that you're a bonehead, or whatever. So there might be some positive feedback loop, but I also think for me to see all these, you just have to watch a sporting event and see the lacking in intellect comments posted, that there'd be some concern on my part that it becomes a slugfest, verbal slugfest. Thank you. Oh, okay, thanks.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So first, let me address the issue of social media. And without talking about mechanism, let's talk about concept. So the two ideas here are narrowcast output by staff. Right now, we have broadcast output. Essentially, we are sending to some of the various groups our agenda. And at least it's more convenient than when I get the notice of council meetings, because I've got to click on links and basically make about 3 or 4 clicks before I get to the actual item I want. Now, I think what's sent out is the agenda, and you can see what's on it, and typically PDF it's small, and then you can click on that. But the issue is it'd be nice to say, I'm interested in this or I'm interested in that, and then get those things told to me, saying this thing will be on the agenda. And it would be nice to me if we could do that citywide, not just on the commission, but on the council, on the ARB and things like that, on all kinds of things that people could express interest list. And maybe we should have a study session with the CIO about the nature of this kind of communication and what the city can do. The CIO and and Claudia, the Chief Communications Officer, about how we could do better communications. The second half of that is more means for community input, whether that's through Twitter, whether it's through bulletin boards, whatever the means is, we should do an exploration of what different means that there can be to get additional input. And one of the things about providing narrowcast output is it facilitates creating narrowcast input on those topics. So I think that there are things we could do about that. Okay, topic 2. I think we need more study sessions. And I think that
That's your next topic.
I'm not talking about the topics. I'm just talking about how the conduct of meetings. I'm not going to talk about what the study sessions are going to be, but I think we need more study sessions. And I think we need study sessions in which where it doesn't have to be staff preparation, where the commission simply says we're putting an item on the agenda so we can discuss it, and it's a commission-led discussion as opposed to a staff-organized discussion. And therefore, the weight of putting that discussion on the agenda is fairly low. And when there's otherwise a commission agenda, PTC meeting agenda that is fairly light, that in conjunction with discussions that were proposed by the chair and the vice chair and the director and assistant director can put items on the agenda to have discussions that for which there is obvious pent-up demand, and there's opportunity for us to have a open Brown Act legal discussion. And in particular, although the straw vote process using unfriendly amendments works for agendized action items, it doesn't work for study sessions because I don't think you can have a vote at a study session per se because they're not agendized that way. And so if you want to have consensus through straw votes, that has to be a separate process on a study session because otherwise there's no ability to do that. One way to get things onto the study session is the next topic, and that is colleagues' memos. I suggested the process, and what perhaps we should talk about, I think that should go on this topic, and that is, in terms of colleagues' memos, we should require 2 members of the commission for colleagues' memo. Right now, we can't have 3 because that's a majority, it's a Brown Act violation. And I think two members should be enough. Even if we have 7 members on the commission, 2 members should be enough to create a colleagues' memo. That colleagues' memo should then be distributed at the next meeting, and we should have a brief discussion as to whether or not, and vote, as to whether or not to agendize that colleagues' memo. But at least it sees the light of day, and we can have a short discussion as to whether to agendize that meeting, and allows commissioners to put comments out there that otherwise don't have a means for putting out there. And we can simply decide not to agendize it and not put a long discussion. But the decision is really whether or not to agendize it, which should be a very short discussion and vote, not on the topic itself. The next thing is that we should be thinking about how we achieve consensus. Okay. Straw votes are one mechanism of achieving consensus, but there are other mechanisms that can improve this process greatly. One is I am very sympathetic with Commissioner Alczek's comment about being able to comment on other people's comments. But one could do that either by saying, I disagree with Commissioner Keller's comment on X, or simply, I disagree with the concept of X without personalizing it. It may be that the Chair Martinez was concerned about personalizing it, but certainly I agree entirely with the idea of commenting on other colleagues' comments. And we could achieve consensus better if we could say, I agree with Commissioner X, or I agree with the concept of X, or I disagree with the concept of X and here's why, and basically keep that brief. The other thing is that I think that we can think about how to do motions and amendments in a different way. And in particular, I noticed that the Mountain View City Council has a process where there is not control by the maker and seconder of the motion of approving amendments. All amendments are voted on by everybody. And in fact, what they do is they essentially put up the staff recommendation as a motion, which is then voted on or down, and then all amendments are voted on by everybody, and essentially, they don't really have a maker and seconder, they really have the motion and in that way, and that might be a thing to consider. I don't know if other commissions have that, planning commissions, but it is a way of basically reducing control of the people who make the motion and making it more egalitarian. I think that one thing we could do is right now the rounds we have of speaking are long, and we tend to run over. And I do that by I turn on the beep and then I turn it off and let people continue to talk. And I think that the reason that happens is because people are afraid that if they don't talk, then they won't get a chance to talk. They won't have a chance to say the things that they want to say because they don't know whether there'll be another round. So the combination of two things. One is more rounds that are shorter. So instead of a 5-minute round, have a 3-minute round. And that we structure this in a certain way. And maybe the structure is that first people indicate whether they're generally in assent or generally in dissent about the idea. Or maybe they're just on the fence, they haven't decided. And indicate issues that concern them. And then if we have more rounds, we have more opportunities for feedback on that. So you don't have to go through a whole long explanation of why you support something or why you don't support something. Sam, I generally support the idea, but I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z. And then we can talk about those topics in a structured way. Here's the list of topics people brought up. Let's talk about this topic, this topic, this topic. And I think that might have a more focused discussion and allow us to achieve consensus in a better way, rather than sort of long monologues. More interaction. I agree with the idea of using lights, and I will tell the history of using lights from at least very briefly, and that is that we used to use lights. We used to use lights, and former staff member Zaria actually had a plastic template that went over the lights into which the commissioners' names were mentioned in position so that we didn't interfere with the council member staff. However, that process went away when Martinez became chair because he couldn't see it. And this plastic thing was lost. I don't know where it went, and actually it was created by Zaria's husband. So I think it had been the practice for many years to do that. It went away because of Chair Martinez's decision because he simply couldn't see. So we started the process of going up and down the lines. And that meant that we couldn't have interaction. And it also meant that we went through monologues instead of engaging each other, which I think is a problem. Two other things quickly. One is I think we should make better use of our consent calendar. I would have been happier, for example, with the motion about the ARB review of sidewalks, if instead of that going directly to council, if that came back to us on a consent item. And if we had heartburn with it, we could have pulled it from the consent calendar, but at least we would have known directly what goes to council. And I think that it would have put us better in the feedback loop there. And so I think we can make better use of the consent calendar in general for things like that. In terms of questions, we have been inconsistent as to whether we encourage questions in advance. So firstly, I would think it's a good idea to have commissioners read the staff report early and provide questions to staff. But sometimes that's encouraged and sometimes that's discouraged. And I think we need to better understand the nature of what the timing is for having questions answered that are sent to the commission, what the timing is for having questions answered at the at a handout at places at the meeting, and what the timing is for having questions that staff is alerted to that the commissioner will ask at the meeting so that the staff can be prepared to answer those questions as opposed to being given questions that staff is asked out of the blue that staff may not be prepared to answer. Thank you.
So this item was originally contemplated to discuss the conduct of meetings, how we use subcommittees and liaisons. We've focused pretty much on some suggestions for improving our meeting processes. Let me just bring it back to subcommittees. Some of the subcommittees that we've had in the past have completed their work and are no longer active, and we should, maybe Secretary Elner can help us with updating our list. The CIP subcommittee, as Director Gittleman noted, is not being used this year, so that's should be taken off the list. The ARB liaison function that Chair Martinez, former Chair Martinez, had continued to play, I think is not being active, although sort of a committee chair to committee, or commission chair to commission chair discussion happens when needed, so we can take that off the list. The comp plan subcommittee can be taken off the list because that will be a task of the full commission, not a subcommittee, under the current approach. That leaves us with the representation on the Regional Housing Mandate Committee, which for the time being I will continue doing. There's a community panel that the Planning Commission is going to, will have a representative member dealing with the housing element, and we've asked Commissioner Tanaka to be a representative to the Housing Element Community Panel, which will kick off their first meeting on March 11th. I believe there will also be a community panel on the Palo Alto process. I've seen some emails about that, and we may have a representative on that as well.
If you're talking about the comp plan process, we'll discuss that with the commission, next month when we come back, after we get council's direction. Right now, our proposal is some kind of, we're calling it a citizens leadership group on the comp plan to help with the community outreach efforts.
Okay, so if we are called upon to provide somebody as a liaison to the citizens leadership group, when it comes up, we will do that. Uppermost on the concerns of the Palo Alto residents are traffic and parking, and I think we have a need to have a parking subcommittee as a place to park our our efforts on this. And Vice Chair Keller will continue to lead that effort. And I spoke with, I always forget his title, Jaime Rodriguez, Chief Transportation Official, that he's thinking of altering the nature of the payback advisor group slightly, and he may want a formal participation by planning commissioner on that. And we will discuss sending a volunteer to provide that liaison when needed. I think we need a subcommittee relative to PC zoning reform, which is one of the asterisk items coming up in a few months. And what I'm concerned about doing load balancing on the commission, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Alchek if you would serve as on a subcommittee or liaison function relative to the PC zoning reform. Aaron?
The one thing I'd like to add to that is, from a staffing capacity, we don't have the staff right now to support additional PTC subcommittees. I mean, our goal is to actually bring this through the Planning Commission and have them, you be a recommending committee along with staff to the council. But we have all these initiatives going on right now, and while it might be useful in the end, we just don't have the staffing capacity to take on additional subcommittees.
So I'm perfectly happy that we have a subcommittee that functions without the safety net of a staff, support.
I mean, in the end, it's something that we're going to be working on together, so it doesn't make sense to staff doing parallel work that we don't know what's going on in the PTC subcommittee. So I mean, my general thought is, I mean, you could always have two people who talk amongst themselves about something, but in the end, this is something that, we're going to be bringing up and then asking for the planning commission to.
Well, I'm going to push back on this a bit. You got a list on the chart, and it's starred as one of the most important of the year, so I'm thinking you want to have staff support for our understanding this as well as we can understand it.
If I can interject, I think the purpose of our earlier conversation was to glean whether the commission wanted to have more meetings in advance of the STAR to get this done, and I heard from some of you that you thought that, yes, it would be good to have maybe at least an additional study session beyond the one that we've put there the month in advance. I think what Aaron's saying is it takes a lot of staff time to prepare that stuff. I mean, you just think of the time that we invested in the comp plan subcommittee. We just have so much on our plate right now that to just establish additional subcommittees on top of wanting additional study sessions to prepare for the commission as a whole, there's a limit to what we can do in terms of supporting the commission on these things.
So perhaps I should take this offline with Director Gilman and Assistant Director Ackman. But I think that the concept of working things in parallel with the commission benefits from things that don't take place when we sort of give you a final up or down vote on a report at a staff meeting in 3 months. At which point, I mean, I'm perfectly prepared if something doesn't make sense to me to vote no, or to table it, or to, to maybe throw a wrench in the timeline if it's something which would have benefited from some work or some liaison work earlier. So this notion that you're going to be doing all this stuff with your staff doesn't ring true to me, that that's not something that the commission can also pay attention to outside of our formal meeting schedule. So let's figure out how to make that happen in a way that doesn't hit resource constraints. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding on my part, but I think that we're very much aligned in terms of wanting to get done what you want to get done.
Right.
So the only question is how to make that happen.
Right, and I guess I had understood from our earlier conversation that this commission was interested in getting these things done by the deadlines, and that you thought that an additional study session, maybe more than one additional study session as a commission earlier in the process would assist you in making sure that happens. And we're happy to support that. I just, having, and part of it is, I'll be honest, coming in quite recently to the city, you are all very intelligent and opinionated individuals. My sense has been that when we meet in subcommittee, we're getting the benefit of now it would be two commissions' individual opinions, and it's not moving ahead the deliberations of the commission as a whole. And so there are definitely areas where subcommittees have been useful. I think when you're doing, text edits and close review of documents like comp plan elements, absolutely. But when we're talking about what is going to be a front burner, very political, charged discussion of a complex issue like PC reform, I think that should be the commission as a whole. And I think and we're prepared to support commission discussions of that issue that are needed to get to the recommendation that we're asking for towards the end of the year.
So I look forward to taking this offline, because I think it's an unresolved kind of process concern. I don't think there's any disagreement that we have the same objective as far as that goes. Doing my improv, what are the great ideas that have come from the commission? One of the things that came from several of the commissioners was managing how we use our time in discussion. And oftentimes we'll have an agenda item. For example, here we're on conduct of meetings 10:30 to 11, and now it's 10 after 11, and have we finished? And we typically allow for questions from the commission. We allow for comments. We've talked about people sort of indicating whether they're going to be inclined to support or oppose something, and maybe stating their concerns or their reasons for supporting or opposing it. We've also haven't had this discussion right now about how we interject public comment, whether we have the public comment first, or maybe we have commission questions that would clarify, the issue before we have the public comment so that they can benefit from the clarification. And one of the things that I've tried to do recently is to be a little bit experimental, just to see what works better, to do things differently, not always the same thing. The foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of small minds, if I get that quotation correct.
Yes.
So we should be consistent, but not always. We should do what works in relationship to particular matters. The use of the straw poll, which is, is paramount in Vice Chair Keller's, excellent experience, I think in particular with the IEEE committees that he serves on, is very useful if and when we need to get a sense of the commission. But I'm very dubious about using the straw poll for things where we're trying to elicit sort of drafting suggestions or to do work that might be done in a subcommittee where you can actually have a more informal and open discussion of, wording or what have you. So I think that's an excellent tactic, maybe not as universally applicable as some might think. The use of, or the adherence to the Palo Alto's version of Robert's Rules of Order comes back to our time limits in terms of how we manage discussion, comes back to whether we're going to behave in a certain way where we announce our support or opposition and state the reasons, whether we have a round of questions and a round of comments and a round of voting and a vote on the substitute motion and amended motion. So if we have a limit that may be, let's say, 45 minutes or 2 hours, from the meeting management, from the chair or vice chair perspective of controlling the time, I think that we want to make sure that we adopt the right sequence and allow for enough effort where it's needed so that we can actually get to some clarity in doing our job. I think I was intrigued by the suggestion of the consent calendar. We haven't used consent calendar as a commission. Aaron.
We've used it once for the urban forestry master plan.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that there's a suggestion from Vice Chair Keller, I believe, that we be tactical and opportunistic and use the consent calendar. And so I'm all for that if it can be used more than once. A lot of people, particularly our younger members, if you want to figure out how to use a computer, get a teenager to tell you. So we've got some people who are more recently teenagers than others telling us about tweeting and so forth, social media and community input. One of the things that I note with appreciation is I think that although no one is here today to capture it live, that we get reported pretty accurately in the press. Both the Palo Alto Weekly and the Daily Post and the San Jose Mercury. So I read the newspapers, and I note that their articles are generally pretty factual, pretty objective, and reasonably complete. And the Palo Alto Weekly in the online form does attract comment from the public, some of which is pretty feisty and some of which is anonymous. And I actually think that a lot of what we'd like to accomplish relative to using, public or social media or other narrowcast broadcast technologies may already be happening in terms of the traditional news outlets' online versions. And if we pay attention to the people who read those articles and comment on that, I think that that's a source of some feedback. We can't see the whites of their eyes, but there's feedback there that we can note. I think if we're going to get more involved in straw polling and some of the other ideas that are pretty heartfelt from the colleagues here, there might be some benefit to having a staff person use a computer at the meeting to capture things upon which we are voting. I find it almost impossible to follow in perfect detail some of the proposed suggestions, ideas, revisions, amendments, particularly from some of our more brilliant and more detail-minded, commissioners, that if we actually capture on the screen so we can see what we're voting on. If we're going to try to do these votes, we should definitely know what we're voting on, and I think if we're trying to get the public to pay attention to us, that would help the public. I mean, if I can't even follow it, how are the people at home going to follow it? So I think to the extent that we take the opportunity to straw poll ourselves and vote in really a detailed fashion, I think if we are going to do that more and more, it would be more and more relevant to have that captured and put on the screen that we can actually be more precise. So that was intended to be a summary, but if anybody wants to clarify, Commissioner Alchek.
Okay, so I'll go through these quickly. I think that, and it's too bad that the communications director wasn't here, but I think you should email her. I think your suggestion of sort of an opt-in listserv format for specific topics is very good. So if you're interested in all topics related to bikes, planning commission bikes, and you can click on some listserv and you get those agendized items, that would go a long way, I think, to, what do you call that? Narrowcast. I think that's really, I know, everybody's got a lot on their plate. I'm just saying, that's brilliant. Someone should write that down, and when we have time and money, we should do it, if that's really the issue. And then I want to respond to Commissioner King's question about questions. I think if you have a question in advance of the meeting, you should send it in. And if the question comes to you during the meeting, you should ask. But I think, this is going to go into my notion of study sessions. I'm going to kind of put it all together. Sometimes study sessions feel like we're like, oh, we should have a study session, and it just goes into the ether. Maybe one day we're going to have a conversation about it. And, when I think of study session, I think of like when a professor gives you 5 articles on a topic and you're supposed to read them, and then you come to the meeting and you discuss them and you try to see what you've learned from them. And I sort of wish our study sessions were like that. And I've said this before about reaching out to other communities and seeing how they handle problems. And I wish we facilitated that approach. So this notion of having homework, we have to read the planning department's memo, but I sort of believe in that you read the memo, you've got some questions you have already, send them in, because it'll help me if you have a question that I didn't think of, and I'll read it in Monday's email. And then if you didn't have time, I think we should utilize that question before, and obviously question during if you have a question during. And then with respect to the colleagues memo, it's the same notion of the study session. I really support the notion of maybe moving to 2-people memos, because you're basically spending some of your own time. Everybody on the commission is intelligent and devoted, and if that individual wants to spend additional time on a topic and present it to us, I just think that's brilliant. And we don't do enough of sort of emailing each other, and the reason why is because we have Brown Act issues, but every once in a while, Commissioner Keller will say, we'll just post a link to an article, and I find them informative. And I think that informal information sharing is helpful, and I think if we can make the colleagues memo more accessible and someone could present something and have a conversation and kickstart it, I think that's great. So I really support 2-person. And then amendment reform in Mountain View, this is a classic example of some other city doing something I had no idea. And I think that's brilliant. I don't think we should own our motions. And I think the amendment process would work better because you feel a little handicapped when someone puts an amendment up and maybe you think, if I would have changed these 2 words, and so you can throw that one up, and suddenly the group has an opportunity to look at all of them side by side. And that kind of goes into that issue about rounds, and you were talking about the format for how we set up the meeting. And maybe if we had this approach where we sort of identified the issues right away that we were having, I'm really struggling with the height of this PC, or I'm really not comfortable with the notion that this is a public benefit, or whatever it is. I'm just using examples. And then we had rounds that were issues focused, so that maybe I don't have anything to say in this round about that topic, so I'll sit it out, and that makes the round faster. And then the next issue that I identified when I went around the first time was the berm, and so then we have a quick round. Who would like to just talk about the berm? And I know that's really black and white, and there's a lot of gray area, and I'm just saying these are ideas that I think that resonate with me. Sometimes when we talk about committees, I'm sort of threatened by the notion, the subcommittees, because I'll give you an example. I may have very different notions than other people do about the PCs, right? And so if I get put on a subcommittee on PCs and I'm working with them, maybe some other commissioner who doesn't necessarily like the way I go on PCs will feel threatened. And I've certainly felt that way about subcommittees. If I had been sort of beating the drum about residential parking permits and I had some ideas about it and then the committee was formed and I didn't get to be a part of it, I'd be like, well, it's going to come to me and maybe I had all these ideas that I would have liked to share. So sometimes when the issue is really controversial, you almost think that the subcommittee method feels like it alienates some. And so that's something to think about. I'm not saying we shouldn't or shouldn't, but and I also agree very strongly about this. I know it's extra effort, but that idea about having the screen up for voting, I feel like the city council does that. And it helps when they do that. And I think if we were forced to see what we were saying being written up on the screen, maybe we would be less long-winded or imprecise about how we want the wording of the amendment to be. So I really think that's probably the best addition. And then the last thing I want to mention about newspapers is that the same generation that is more apt to using these social media features is the same generation that rarely looks to newspapers for their news sources. So while I think you're right that the Palo Weekly staff may get our meetings down right, I don't know I think the people who are reading the newspaper, that may not be the people we're having a hard time getting a hold of. So like the people who would be served by the Palo Alto journalists getting it right. Anyways, that's it.
Let's just move ahead, and if anybody wants to move back as we move ahead, don't hesitate. We've got, I think, a very important topic about how we use study sessions. Maybe the question of how we use them was something we just discussed in terms of how we conduct our meetings. Maybe the issue now is what topics should be or could be studied. And I think maybe just to kick this off, I think that there's a need for more precision in terms of what we understand a study session to be. What does it require? Is this something that's going to involve some level of resource from the staff? Is it something for which there would be relevant case studies from other communities, academic papers, articles about planning, transportation topics, land use, and so on? Is it something that we would have an opportunity for our own thinking to be reflected in some form of a memo or other input to the topic, and then there's a question of how much bandwidth we have to study issues. Is this something we should be doing every month or 6 times a year or 4 times a year or and maybe there should be some hierarchy of what are the top level major categories in which there are concerns and a need for insight within the community and a need for recommendations, ultimately coming from a commission going up to the council for action. So we have on our today's agenda, and it's on the board. We had, at the bottom of the list of major projects for 2014, we have additional items for scheduling, and this includes bike plan update, joint meeting with council, joint meetings with ARB, study sessions on bus, rapid transit, and Grand Boulevard Initiative, study session on rail corridor study, professional development, commissioner training, CPI-related ordinance. Let's open up. We got about 15 or 20 minutes here. what would be our short list and our hot list of things that we'd like to study and talk about in study sessions. Vice Chair Keller.
So firstly, each of the 3 starred items on that list, other than the CIP review, should have early study sessions for commission-wide input into the process. So obviously some staff recommendation, some staff preparation is necessary, but I think that it more is to get the ideas out for staff to consider to the extent that it hasn't already considered them, and to get some feedback on what it already is considering, so that's what I'd recommend there. I think that in general, the colleagues' memo should lead to a brief study session type thing on the discussion where they can basically present the idea with some feedback, and then a decision to whether or not to recommend a further action item, a meeting or whatever on that, how that goes in terms of that. In terms of subcommittee process, I'm sympathetic with Commissioner Olczak's notion of that if you're on the committee, you may have more influence than somebody who's not on the committee. And I think that there are proper uses of subcommittees, and in particular, when a colleague's memo is put together, then sometimes follow-up work on that may occur by the subcommittee of the colleagues who put together that memo. And finally, I think that we should have impromptu, not organized, not staff-led, not staff preparation study sessions for EIR comments. So, for example, I'm never sure whether I can make an EIR comment because of the Brown Act on Caltrain electrification or the bus rapid transit. I don't want a study session on bus rapid transit in general. I mean, that would be interesting. What I want is now that if there's an EIR out on that, I want a quick study session agendized quickly on the City Council agenda, where the commissioners can give their EIR comments that can be collected by staff and submitted as part of the staff EIR comments to the EIR, to the agency running the EIR. I think that would be an excellent way of first of all, giving input to the staff in terms of EIR comments, and secondly, give an outlet for the commission to provide their feedback on items that are occurring within or without the city. Thank you.
Through the chair. Just to respond to one comment, just an overarching comment related to colleagues' memos and study sessions. And I think one hesitation you've seen from staff about both of these topics is, what are the expectations coming out of these? Now, if there's, I think, for instance, Vice Chair Keller mentioned that there may be a follow-up action to see something on the agenda. To the extent that it's not consistent with the work plan that the city manager has provided, or signed off on our department, and council direction, it's going to be difficult to work that into our work plan given all that we have. So we need to see some type of consistency, and we're not doing something that's off track from what we've been given direction to do.
There was a message that was sent in from a consultant who had some ideas about PTC process from a process perspective that came into Director Gittleman, which I thought was interesting in certainly a general way. But when I looked at the PTC process kind of ideas, I went to the city website, which talked about the responsibilities of the commission. And from the ordinance that authorizes the creation of the Planning and Transportation Commission, and as it's stated on the city's website, there are certain primary responsibilities which are in our charter, the expectation of the council, and on the website it only lists 5 responsibilities, and recommendations to the city council on the comprehensive plan, et cetera, recommendations to the council on the zoning map, et cetera, recommendations to the council on subdivisions, variances and use permits, considering other policies and programs affecting development and land use for final city council action, and reviewing and making recommendations on individual projects such as planned community zones, open space development, and those other projects as are directed by the zoning code staff and city council. So that's a relatively specific set of responsibilities. And I would think that to the extent that we have responsibilities as a commission, it's fair game and relevant for us to memorandize or study or discuss how we can discharge those responsibilities as best we can. So there's a lot of enthusiasm in a general way expressed for working harder and working better. But I think that we can have our most optimal contribution to the city if we tailor that to our stated responsibilities. But let me go back to colleagues. So this is on a question of study session topics that we would like to put on our calendar this year. Commissioner King.
Let's see, okay, I will try and be brief. So, I mean, we're hearing as loud and clear without shouting from staff that this is a very busy year for them and that they're not likely to want to entertain additional things. So it looks to me like study sessions should be mission critical, right, given their resource constraints, that we stick with the three that Arthur referenced, not the CIP, but the other three starred, that those are the study sessions we ask for this year, in my mind, to support their completing their mission. So that's my input on that. And then I'll just use a couple minutes to drop back on a couple of the other topics of conduct. So regarding the questions, I think it would be good if we came to an agreement with staff. I don't know how specific we want to be, but again, my goal is to have processes so that there either is a flow chart or you can imagine a flow chart. If we do ask questions of staff, there should be some expectation that, oh, well, if we get our agenda on Friday or Monday, that, oh, if you ask the question by the end of Monday, it'll either be answered prior to the meeting or at the meeting. But certainly we can't expect that if we ask it at 4 o'clock on the day of the meeting, that we're going to get an answer either place. And so we should, I think, work, or maybe staff can advise us, hey, here's realistic, here's what we would want from you. And it's not going to fit every situation because different staff has different loads, et cetera. But it'll be good for us to come to an agreement so we have that expectation. Did you want to address that, Aaron?
Sure, and I think that's great. I mean, to the extent that you can provide us questions before the meeting, we think that's fantastic because it helps us prepare better for the meeting itself. So I'd say if you get it to by the end of the day, Monday, we'll be sure to either, be prepared to answer it at the meeting or in some circumstances, if it makes sense, provide a written answer.
Okay, great. And then also regarding your point about expectations of colleagues' memos, we don't have time today, but we should discuss that because I think, in my mind, the goal of the colleagues' memo is to, hey, put this issue out here. Let's start talking about it. It may not be we're obviously work plan focused by top-down city manager, and in the case of this colleagues' memo on PC, nothing happened until the next year. And so that's fine, but I wouldn't want to hinder people creating and giving to staff, or including staff in colleagues' memos, because it's not in your work plan for this year, understanding it's a long-term planning. One of the things that, as far as input, that I'm not sure that there's an answer to this, but one of the things that can happen, and why I like the straw poll or unfriendly motion mechanism we've been using, is that sometimes a commissioner will say something very stridently. For instance, an example I think was when we were talking about the Baylands plan and whether there's going to be a gym out there. And I'm biased towards basketball, but a couple of the commissioners, I believe, my recollection is, it doesn't matter, but my recollection is, spoke stridently that we don't need a gym out there. And then that then I remember hearing further down the thing, oh, we didn't even include that in the EIR because we had heard negative feedback on the gym. So it's amazing to me how a couple of comments, and in this case, again, doesn't matter whether that really drove the exclusion from the EIR, but that one or two commissioners' comments can be taken by staff or the process, let's call it, and alter the course of history, when in fact, if we had, in that case, it typically is the last person who goes, right? So let's say 5 commissioners speak, and then the last 2 speak vehemently for or against something. That can alter the course of history, when in fact, the other 5 may have had the exact opposite opinion. So I think my goal is, when we're giving feedback to staff, that as much as possible, it should be through some consensus mechanism rather than them scribbling down notes and unweighted notes. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
So I have a reminder from Commissioner Alchek that he's going to have to leave a little bit early. So I'm going to call on him next. But as I do this, our last category on the agenda is wrap-up and adjournment. And what I was hoping to do in the wrap-up is for each individual commissioner to reflect on anything in particular that they have gotten value today from this retreat. And mindful of Commissioner Tanaka's wisdom that we should really focus on the short list as to 1 or 2 or 3 things that really matter. So think of, if there's just 1 or 2 or 3 things that really could make our work better, that we talked about today, or we need to do more work, please call it out. So Commissioner Alchek, to you.
Okay, so just on the topic of study sessions real quick, I sort of think that if the study session we should be considering topics for study sessions that don't make staff think, oh God, we don't have the budget or we don't have the time to do that. So ideally we pick the topics that we're going to see in this year, and it's not redundant to study them, because anything we do, any time or money we spend now will make the process later on better. And so I think we've done that with those topics that we've started and identified. And I just want to add that I really think that our process of the study session could be 2 ways. And so if, unlike the process we bring to general meetings, if when we approached study sessions, individual commissioners sort of took a little extra time to do their own sort of investigations or research and sort of came with some material, or were able to disseminate some material in advance of the meeting. So for example, if we were going to have a study session on public benefits, and I also think, by the way, that any material that comes from staff for a study session should come out more than just like the weekend before. There should be like a 3-week sort of lead up. That gives us time to read it, maybe gives us time to sort of find sources of information so that we're both actually studying it. And gives the community more time with the topic and the ideas, and because I would love to be able to say, if we were talking about housing elements, right, or housing, the housing element, maybe after you publish it, I reach out to Steve and Levy, and I say, you want to meet for coffee, I want to talk to you, and what sort of issues should we be thinking about? And then it's a little more informed. He unfortunately doesn't come to enough of our meetings. He should come to all of them. But I've heard him speak to small groups recently, and it's sort of surprising. I know he spoke to like the downtown permit mafia. And anyway, and then I just want to say about today, I think the most beneficial thing that we've done today is look inward and see how we can improve our system. We're really, really articulate and intelligent and devoted. And any even small idea that we have to improve our process, I think really we should follow up on. And I think it's a little confusing to us who's supposed to take charge. We talked about the lights, and how will that actually get done? And maybe the only way it will get done is if Commissioner Keller fabricates some new plastic piece in his garage, or gets a hold of Commissioner Zaria's husband and makes it happen, or whatever. But, I hope we follow up on some of these ideas, the lights, issue spotting and I think that we will have more, like maybe next year we'll be much more excited to come to this 4-hour or 5-hour retreat if we know that we made we had so much progress here. So I think follow-up is going to be the key here because we really came up with great ideas.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, so in terms of study session, I know we have the RPP on agenda, but I think the RPP is only addressing kind of a symptom. It's not really addressing necessarily the problem, which is, I think one way is, of course, parking intrusion is a problem in neighborhoods, but I think the other thing that we should be thinking about, and I don't know if it's necessarily on our agenda, but it's more longer term, is parking supply. So I think, that's one of the big limiting factors in the redevelopment of Cal Ave is parking. And so I think that's something which perhaps we could show some leadership on the Planning Commission in terms of trying to proactively think about parking supply. Okay, so that's study session. In terms of the 1 or 2 things we can think about as priorities. So I've been thinking about this a bit as everyone has been talking, and I'm thinking that one would be something which I think Commissioner Alchek and the Chair have both talked about, which is actually, the more I think about it, the more I think that a discussion with City Council, probably by the Chair, on how work gets delegated to different commissions and boards, I think would be a really good thing, just to make the city overall more effective. So I think that's one thing I've been thinking about. So not necessarily something that the rest of us worry about, but maybe the Chair and Vice Chair take on. And then the other thing is, I was just thinking about the other priority is, connected city technology. And I think in order for this body to be more effective, I think that getting community input is actually a good thing. And so trying to facilitate that through technology would be something that we should try.
Commissioner King.
Can you refresh me on that last assignment that we're addressing right now? Your request was to?
So there's, so it's 11:45.
Yep.
So we're just about done. You can talk about anything that we talked about all morning long.
Yeah.
But in terms of wrapping up the meeting, I'm interested in any feedback you have to us as a group of any insight you've gotten. If there's just one insight, what's, what might that be about? We're working hard. How can we do more, do it better?
Mm-hmm.
Given the importance of planning for the city, if there's any comments you have on, the priority of the planning issues.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, so I think that the meeting underlines that, and what I've certainly felt as the new person, is that we don't all agree, or we don't disagree, but there may not be clarity around the process. And so I think this has been a really good part of this meeting, is just discussing how do things work, or is there a process in place? In some cases, there isn't a process in place. So I think it would probably be a good idea for us to have maybe a quarterly process where we come an hour early before a meeting, sit around and just talk about process. How is it working? What could we improve? Are the things that we've talked about at this meeting, are we moving them forward? And, subject to resource constraints, maybe one of the staff members attends that meeting prior to our, and always have it just for logistics' sake, on our day of commission meeting, just before the commission meeting. Let's see. And then the other point I had is, Commissioner Alchek has left, but I think we need to define study session, because what I'm seeing is 2 really different concepts of what a study session is. Relative to these specific issues, I see it as staff is really it's an inclusive meeting to bring us up to speed on where they are, so that we can provide input to the process, so that we're all moving in parallel, rather than staff bringing us a report at the end when it's supposed to be due, and we kick it back to staff. So that's one type of study session, very specific, focused to some output that is in our work plan. I think Commissioner Alchek the way he was discussing it, I see that as a, hey, this is really interesting, it's an interesting topic relevant to what we're doing, but it's not focused, it's not specific. It's, hey, let's everybody bring in some materials and we'll talk about this bigger issue. And so, and again, I support that this year you guys are fully taxed, and so I would expect all study sessions are of the specific variety, but moving forward, we may want to actually do some wordsmithing and come up with another definition for the two types of things, so that we're clear that one, there's a type of meeting that's, the goal is to provide us information well in advance of a decision, and the other is a general meeting to study a general topic. Does that make sense? Okay. That's it, thanks.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So firstly, with respect to social media, I suggest that there be a subcommittee of commissioners who know something about social media, who work with staff, and especially the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Communication Officer, Claudia, to try to come up with a mechanism on how we might better use social media for the commission and in general. Secondly, I think that we need to formalize the colleagues memo process. I think that we need to be cognizant of the issue on staff resources. I think that a colleagues memo can trigger a commission-led discussion at a study session, which is for which staff preparation participation is minimal. I think that at least we would need some feedback from the city attorney in terms of what's in the memo to make sure that we doesn't get us in trouble. And that's, I assume, a quick review that wouldn't take much time, and some feedback on the memo from staff that would be quick, so that we don't go far afield or something. But I think that essentially, other than that amendment process, not gatekeeping process, but amendment process, we can go forward on that. The only thing about an action item, from my point of view, is that the commission would then vote on, at the meeting, as to the ability to vote on whether or how to move forward. And that's the only action that I would want to have at such a study session. And obviously, the commission would, in part of that process, take into account the amount of staff effort involved in and whether staff resources are moving forward. And sometimes a study session might be on a particular topic that is already on a staff process for the already priority. It's just that the commission has an opportunity to provide input into the process for which there isn't otherwise a mechanism for doing that. Thirdly, I do think it makes sense to have study sessions for EIR comments. We do that for our own agenda items, but we don't often when we have but we don't do that for agendas that are outside of the city, such as transportation, Caltrain, VTA, Caltrans, like the freeways and the roadway, or things like that. And I think that that's a good opportunity. It's a quick thing to do. Point us at the EIR. We can make comments on it, and then you get your feedback that you can submit together. And that might be a better thing than each of us submitting comments. I'm not sure the Brown Act issue of each of us submitting comments to the EIR, but I was cautioned in terms of submitting comments with respect to high-speed rail because of potential litigation, so this might get around that problem. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everybody on the staff who came early today and helped support this. Thanks, Robin, for setting up the meeting. Thanks for our tech team in the back, and hopefully the public who's interested is able to get whatever information they need. I think one of the suggestions was that we try to capture the value of today's discussion with follow-up of some sort, and I think we'll do that in a variety of ways. I note that we didn't have a retreat last year, so I think one of the things that is pretty important is that we make a commitment to doing the retreat on an annual basis at a minimum, and I think the timing of doing it in the spring following the publication of the department work plan seems to be productive, which is also following the publication of the council priorities. I'd like to volunteer to work with the staff, if that would be possible, to do a specific type of follow-up, and that is, I think that we should get, regarding the effectiveness of the commission, it would be valuable for us as a commission to get some feedback from the staff. That could be done in a way that encourages candor and constructive, suggestions, and also to get feedback from our primary consumer of our recommendations, the council. And Commissioner Tanaka suggested that it would be timely for the commission chair to schedule a one-on-one meeting with the mayor, which I'm more than happy to do. But I think that to the extent that the needs of the council are being met, or are not being met, or could be better met, or if there's some different, product that from the commission, in addition to our formal recommendations and verbatim minutes, or verbose minutes, that I'd like that feedback from staff and council. So I will volunteer to follow up on that. Maybe we can tee that up as a matter that we put on our agenda somehow. I'd like to just make some personal observations on what for me has been a learning process about what it means to be a commissioner. So what's the role of the commissioner? And I think all of us come in our our personal lives and other experience from different lines of work and professions and so forth. So my background is as a sort of in the private sector, as a member of a senior executive management team, served on a couple of boards, and before that I was a lawyer and had pretty deep background in the legal system. So I really think of the duty of an officer sometimes in terms of being a fiduciary. Now that's not exactly applicable to being a planning commissioner, but if you're a fiduciary, you're responsible for the best interests of someone or a group or a community. And I think that we have, as planning commissioners, we have a sort of a higher, sort of more overarching objective fiduciary duty to the welfare of the community. In a corporate setting, shareholder value, the stock price, whatever it is that you can quantitatively measure is often used as a metric. What are the best interests of the city? And this goes back to really honoring the message from Eduardo Martinez that this is a city that's a pretty nice place. It's special in many respects. It's got challenges which are maybe not as unique as we like to think they are, but we are. We do have our own unique opportunities and challenges, and I think the Planning Commission, to me, has this fiduciary duty to continue to strive to recognize and articulate what might be, from a planning and transportation perspective, those best interests. This is separate from having a personal suggestion, a good idea, or a personal bias about what should be the outcome. And I know that I value contentious, vigorous debate and discussion, and when we air our personal, unique perspective, oftentimes these suggestions are good. Sometimes they get a consensus, sometimes not. But I think that the role of the commissioner, different from being on the council. I think when you run for office, when you get elected by the voters, in a sense, you're laying out there what your personal agenda is, and maybe you're supposed to pursue this commitment and expectation that you sort of have with the public as to who voted for you and who didn't, what you're going to do. But I think on the commission, I think of this more as a fiduciary opportunity to promote and serve the best interests of the city, and not one in which we're suppressing our personal interests or bias, which I think is again different from the council, different from being an advocate on other issues. And I really value this opportunity. I think every meeting is hugely a learning opportunity for me to see what's going on in the city, what people are concerned about, and what are the the action items. And the list of potential action items is bigger than what's practically realistic. And I think that we should be mindful of working closely with staff on making sure that we focus on the things that are viable, that we can get done and add value. So that would be my sort of final comments. Does anybody want to say anything else before we adjourn? If not, thank you very much. See you all shortly.